If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, Relying on Each Other. Ah! Alicent let out a scream as Rhaegar left the room. Her frustration came out in a flurry of flung pillows and disheveled covers. She was moving around quickly, pulling at her hair in a desperate way. "Queen, is there anything you need?" the maid asked from the other side of the door. Her voice was filled with concern. "Get out. I don't want anything, get out." Alicent's response was sharp and laced with curses, her anger boiling over like a cauldron ready to spill. She was aware that her actions hadn't gone unnoticed, which led to the chilling warning she had just received. Even the veiled threat against her own son, Aegon, hadn't gone unnoticed. In the middle of her rage, Alicent started to cry, her head in her hands as she banged her forehead against the wall in an attempt to drown out her anguish. Amidst the blur of tears and the constriction of her throat, one phrase emerged, repeated like a mantra, "It wasn't me, I really didn't want to." What she didn't want remained a mystery to all but herself. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter at all. Outside the castle, Rhaegar emerged from the secret passage and looked up at the sky, where the moon was obscured by thick, dark clouds. He looked over at the distant cliffs and knew his dragon was resting there. Never mind, Rhaenyra isn't in a good mood today. Just go find her, he told himself, his thoughts surprisingly calm after the encounter with Alicent. Originally planning to find comfort in Cannibal's company, Rhaegar now felt a sense of relief at the thought of his sister. He made his way back into the castle with the coal stove in hand, a smile on his face. As he approached Rhaenyra's door, he was surprised to find Cole, the guard stationed outside, waiting for him. "Prince," Cole greeted, his eyebrows raised in curiosity at Rhaegar's unexpected visit. "I'm looking for Rhaenyra. We agreed to sleep together," Rhaegar replied matter-of-factly, concocting a story on the spot as he pushed open the door and entered the room without hesitation, breezing past the guard knights. As he stepped into the bedroom, Rhaegar took his time. There she was, Rhaenyra, lying peacefully on her side on the bed, her silver-gold locks cascading around her. Rhaegar approached his sister, observing her bold sleeping pose, and couldn't help but shake his head with a bemused expression. "No wonder I'm always so overwhelmed," he muttered under his breath, only to be startled as Rhaenyra suddenly opened her eyes and fixed her gaze on him. Rhaegar was caught off guard and took a step back as Rhaenyra playfully pulled him onto the bed. "Sister," he greeted with a mix of surprise and amusement, settling onto the bed at her insistence. Rhaenyra playfully pinched his cheeks. "Rhaegar, who gave you the nerve to come into my room without asking?" "I have a dragon, so I can go wherever I want," Rhaegar replied, tilting his head defiantly. "Humph, I think you need to be taught a lesson," Rhaenyra retorted, not one to put up with her brother's antics. She then pinched his cheeks with one hand, which made Rhaegar's face turn red and swell. Despite his best efforts to resist, Rhaegar found himself overpowered by his sister's strength. Eventually, she relented and let go of him, satisfied with her playful teasing. Rhaenyra settled down on the bed next to Rhaegar, took off her coat, and curled up close to him, curious. "Where did you get that black robe? Isn't that what all the bad guys wear?" Rhaegar replied with a wry smile, adjusting his position to be more comfortable. Rhaenyra couldn't help but tease, "Oh, are you a bad guy?" Rhaegar blinked, his expression uncertain as he nestled closer to his sister. "I'm not sure." "Then no," Rhaenyra replied softly, running her fingers through his hair. "You're my brother, and I'll be relieved as long as you come back safely." Rhaegar remained silent, but he nestled even closer to her, finding comfort in her embrace. Rhaenyra noticed the of concern in Rhaegar's demeanor and asked, "What's troubling you? Weren't you quite spirited earlier, giving me a hard time?" "But I'm worried about you too," Rhaenyra responded, her tone softening. "You've been missing for days, and Father and I have been beside ourselves with anxiety." "I'm sorry," Rhaegar said sincerely, not wanting to dodge responsibility. He admitted that he'd been a bit lax in taking care of important matters and had been spending too much time on less important things in the peninsula. Rhaenyra's expression softened, and she gave him a gentle kiss on the head, whispering, "It's okay, as long as you're back. Just promise me you won't do it again." "All right," Rhaegar nodded, accepting the mistake. Feeling a bit flustered by his nod, Rhaenyra's cheeks flushed slightly. "Go to sleep now. Tomorrow, you can talk to Father about everything." "Okay," Rhaegar agreed, putting his arm around her waist, finding comfort in her presence. As they lay there in silence, Rhaegar suddenly spoke up. "Sister, some people say that I might hurt you. Rhaenyra was too drowsy to open her eyes fully, so she tightened her hold on him and murmured, that won't happen. We've got each other's backs. Rhaegar replied softly, feeling reassured by her words. As the night gave way to dawn, Rhaegar woke up to find his sister sitting at the dressing table, carefully brushing her hair. He smiled as he blinked away the last of his sleepiness. It's good to be back home, he said to himself, feeling grateful to be back with his family. When Rhaenyra realized he was awake, she gently encouraged him to get up and join them for breakfast. With a nod, Rhaegar quickly got dressed, still thinking about what had happened the night before. Just as he finished getting dressed, there was a knock at the door, followed by Harold's calm voice. Princess, is Prince Rhaegar in your chambers? Rhaenyra exchanged a puzzled glance with Rhaegar before confirming his presence to the guard. Yes, sire. How may I assist you? The king wishes to speak with the prince personally, Harold relayed tersely. Rhaenyra's brow furrowed with curiosity as she turned to her brother. Rhaegar merely shrugged in response, equally puzzled by the unexpected summons. Go ahead, comfort father. He's not feeling well, Rhaenyra advised gently. Rhaegar nodded and leaned in to kiss his sister on the cheek before leaving the room. Rhaenyra was amused by her brother's departure and continued to prepare for the day ahead. After leaving his quarters, Rhaegar, with Harold by his side, made his way to his father's chamber door. Just as he was about to knock, the door to the room next door opened, and there was Alicent, being led by a maid. Their eyes met for a second, but Alicent didn't say anything. She just nodded her head a little and kept going. With a smile, Rhaegar knocked on the door and went in. Harold closed the door behind him and stood guard. As soon as he walked in, Rhaegar wrinkled his nose at the smell of wine that lingered in the air. Viserys was slouched in a reclining chair by a round table, his face flushed from drink but his gaze unusually sharp. Rhaegar couldn't help but notice the scattered empty bottles, which seemed to be evidence of his father's indulgence from the previous night. Rhaegar tried to ignore the smell as he approached his father. Father, what can I do for you? He asked. He'd been expecting to talk about his recent trip to the peninsula or maybe the free folk, but nothing as important as what Viserys brought up next. Rhaegar, do you want to become the heir to throne? Viserys' words hit Rhaegar like a punch in the stomach, leaving him momentarily stunned. What do you mean? Rhaegar stammered, his mind struggling to comprehend the unexpected proposition. I'm going to change the rules of succession and make you the new heir, Viserys said bluntly, trying to clear up the confusion on Rhaegar's face. No. Rhaenyra is the rightful heir, as has been decreed to the realm, Rhaegar responded firmly, his convictions unwavering. Quickly moving to his father's side, Rhaegar searched his eyes, his voice laced with concern. Has someone influenced you, father? You've always defended Rhaenyra's claim. What's changed your mind? Chapter 102, Refusal. Rhaegar, my son, no one has clouded my mind, Viserys reassured his eldest son, offering a gentle smile as he clasped Rhaegar's hand. Rhaegar was confused. He asked, then why do you want to change the line of succession? Rhaenyra has done nothing wrong. I was the one who recklessly tamed the dragon, who acted without authorization, and who ended up stranded in the peninsula. He couldn't understand why his father had made that decision. He was the one at fault, while Rhaenyra had only acted to rescue him, defying her father's orders out of concern. Such actions didn't warrant such severe consequences. You're mistaken, Rhaegar, Viserys said, his tone sincere. My intentions run deeper than blaming Rhaenyra for her actions. As my firstborn, you should have been the rightful heir. However, as a child, you were too young to take on that kind of responsibility. So I made Rhaenyra the heir to what was yours. Rhaegar met his father's gaze squarely and argued, but Rhaenyra has proven herself capable and loyal to the family. That's another reason not to replace her. Yet she is a woman. Viserys interjected sharply, his tone carrying weight. And there are many who oppose her, far outnumbering those who support her. I'm with her, Rhaegar said firmly, his demeanor shifting to one of resolve. With a fully grown dragon by my side, any who challenge her will have to face the dragon fire. Viserys regarded his son with a mixture of amusement and pride, chuckling softly. Ah, the sight of an adult dragon, indeed formidable, capable of vanquishing armies. But Rhaegar remained serious. There is no jest in this, father. The cannibal has bested Vermithor and Silverwing, ranking among the strongest of dragons next to Rhaegar. Rhaegar was confident in himself and his dragon. Aegon the Conqueror's attempt to subdue Dorne is a good example of what not to do, Viserys said without emotion. Queen Rhaenys's misfortune, with Merax's demise due to a scorpion crossbow arrow, marked the downfall of their campaign. Rhaegar nodded knowingly, well versed in historical accounts. And yet, her death and the dragon's demise signaled the failure of a grand conquest, Viserys continued, his tone firm as he grasped Rhaegar's hand. You need to know, Rhaegar, that relying too heavily on dragons can be dangerous. True power lies in winning the support of the people, not in the might of dragons alone. But have you really won the support of our people? Rhaegar thought about the ongoing rebellions and unrest across the realm. From the Ironborn raids along the coast to the persistent troubles along the Dornish border, these challenges showed that his father's assertion of control wasn't as strong as he thought. Even Rhaegar the Cruel, with the formidable Velaeryons at his command, ultimately met his downfall due to his tyranny. He faced rebellion and death upon the Iron Throne. Viserys continued, shifting the focus. Do you think your dragons are as strong as Velaeryons? Are you as fearless as the warlike Rhaegar? Rhaegar was quiet for a moment, acknowledging his own limitations. He was still a young prince, and the cannibal hadn't reached its full potential yet. I'm a prince of the realm, Rhaegar replied, thinking about his future. I can serve on the royal council or fulfill my duties as a prince. Viserys looked at his son with a mix of love and wisdom. Those are noble aspirations, my son, but too childish. Viserys shared a memory, his eyes betraying a hint of sadness as he spoke softly. There was a time when Damon and I were as close as you and Rhaenyra, bound by love and trust. We were inseparable, he reminisced. Before the 101st Council, I clashed with my cousin Rhaenys about who should get to sit on the Iron Throne. Damon, with the Dark Sister at his side, swore to defeat anyone who stood in my way, Viserys went on, his voice tinged with admiration. He was fearless and resolute. Thanks to Damon's unwavering support, Grandfather Jaehaerys recognized the pressing need to address the issue of succession. Convening the 101st Great Council, Viserys recounted, his eyes misting over. At the council, I secured my position as the family's heir with an overwhelming majority, Viserys revealed, his voice quavering with emotion. Rhaegar, can you and Rhaenyra really keep the unbreakable bond that Damon and I had? Viserys asked, his gaze intense. Rhaegar couldn't meet his father's gaze and lowered his head. There's always hope. Viserys' tone softened as he leaned in and whispered, I suggest you keep our family tradition alive. Really? Rhaegar's eyes opened wide in disbelief, looking for confirmation from his father. Viserys nodded seriously. Absolutely. And has she agreed? Rhaegar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Not yet, Viserys replied with a soft chuckle. That's why we're having this conversation. Rhaegar stepped back and took his hand out of his father's grasp, feeling a mix of emotions. He was feeling a bit of a mix of emotions, a bit of celebration and a bit of disappointment, which made him feel a bit down. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting in the way of Rhaenyra's plans, a thought that weighed heavily on his conscience. He was haunted by the words of Falcon and Skyla, who had warned him of the complexities ahead. Rhaenyra's future husband and children, and his own uncertain position in the line of succession. I'll become another Damon. Rhaegar murmured, his thoughts all over the place as he tried to calm down. Viserys shook his head emphatically, saying, No way. You are Rhaegar, my firstborn, the prince destined for greatness. You're not going to go down the dishonorable path like Damon. Viserys put his hands on Rhaegar's shoulders and spoke in a serious tone, as the future ruler of the Iron Throne, you'll have the power to lead the realm. Father, I'm prepared, Rhaegar replied, though his mind was in turmoil. Pushing his father's hands away, Rhaegar backed away, muttering to himself, those words are your own, father. Damon was a man of sacrifice, but I can't. You can't what? Abandon your aspirations for the throne, or betray Rhaenyra. Viserys interrupted gently, his smile serene. You've gained the loyalty of the Peninsula nobles, which is a pretty big deal for a prince. Father, your words are making me feel the same way I did when the Peninsula nobles pledged their allegiance, Rhaegar said, his voice getting deeper as he tried to stay calm. I cannot bring myself to harm Rhaenyra. She would despise me, and I would despise myself. With a heavy heart, Rhaegar turned to leave without looking back, his mind made up. Viserys didn't try to stop him. He kept his tone firm, saying, My son, choices are unavoidable. You'll face these choices again and again. Then I will await the day when the choice is clear, the day Rhaenyra no longer allows me to remain in King's Landing, Rhaegar declared as he exited the room. Chapter 103, Is it Rhaegar? Bang! The door slammed shut with a loud thud. Viserys sank into his chair, closed his eyes against the throbbing headache, and let out a weary sigh. Creak! The door opened again, and Harold's voice echoed in the room. Your Grace, the prince has been adored by the princess since childhood. Your proposal is too sudden and harsh for him. He must face it eventually, Viserys responded, lowering his head. Rhaenyra is gentle and lacks a clear vision. If she inherits the Iron Throne, it won't benefit her or the kingdom. But you still chose the princess, Harold said, sounding a bit helpless. Yes, she and I are similar, a weak father and daughter, Viserys admitted, a self-deprecating smile on his lips. He just wanted to rule by winning hearts and minds, but it was just an excuse for his own mediocrity and incompetence. In his heart, he envied his brother Damon and his eldest son Rhaegar, both of whom embodied a fearless spirit and the audacity to wield a sword. But Viserys was naturally weak. His life had been smooth and the throne had basically been handed to him on a plate, so to speak, allowing him to reach the pinnacle without much effort. Everything had gone too well. His grandfather Jaehaerys had not lived long enough to instill in him the courage to lead decisively. Now, Viserys was hoping for a strong leader to take the throne after him, to bring back the glory of House Targaryen. He thought his eldest son, Rhaegar, could be that man. After a moment of silence, Viserys beckoned Harold and said with a weary breath, "Summon Rhaenyra. Tell her I need to speak with her." Harold glanced at the sorrowful king and nodded, "Yes, Your Grace." Rhaegar was in a hurry as he ran through the corridor, his panic getting the better of him until he found himself outside the castle. By the time he realized where he was, he had reached the cliffs. Roar! The cannibal let out a low growl as it sensed its master's presence. Its massive form loomed above him. The dragon could tell that Rhaegar was scared, which was out of character for the usually bold prince. Rhaegar looked up at the enormous black dragon, towering like a mountain, and gasped, "I need some air, partner." The cannibal stood up, wrapped its tail around Rhaegar's waist, and hoisted him onto its back. Roar! With a mighty flap of its wings, the dragon took off, soaring into the sky and cutting through the clouds. Flying in circles was a simple task, but for Rhaegar, the sky and sea offered a much-needed escape, washing away his confusion and fear. Inside the castle, Rhaenyra washed up and walked down the hall for breakfast. Alongside her was a haggard-looking Alicent. Rhaenyra ate small bites of bread, her demeanor light and carefree. Alicent, on the other hand, didn't seem to have much appetite. She glanced at Rhaenyra from time to time. She opened her mouth several times as if to speak, but then stopped herself. Rhaenyra couldn't help but chuckle to herself. This former sister of hers had a real flair for drama. She had no idea what Alicent had been through the night before and subconsciously assumed that Alicent had some kind of agenda. "Princess, the king has summoned you," Harold said softly as he approached the table near the end of breakfast. Rhaenyra wiped the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief and asked, "Where's Rhaegar? Has he had breakfast yet?" "Not yet. The prince had something to attend to and went out," Harold replied, forcing a smile. He hesitated before adding, "It would be best if you saw the king first. It's very important." "Yes, sire," Rhaenyra responded, frowning curiously as she left the table. Not long after, Rhaenyra entered her father's room. Viserys had been waiting for a while and greeted her with a smile. "Please, have a seat, Rhaenyra. What did you want to see me about?" Rhaenyra asked as she slowly stepped forward and pulled out a chair to sit across from him. Viserys' smile seemed a bit too good to be true, deepening her suspicions. He poured himself a glass of wine, took a large gulp, and then looked down, his expression troubled. Rhaenyra's eyes narrowed as a thought crossed her mind. Pursing her lips, she said leisurely, "Rhaegar returned safely. You gave me a choice." "No. No talk of your marriage today," Viserys interrupted hastily, his voice tinged with fear. Rhaenyra breathed a sigh of relief and laughed softly. "What else could be so difficult for you besides this?" She had foolishly assumed her father was trying to rush her marriage. She'd already made up her mind, though. Viserys lifted his head, meeting his daughter's gaze, and said with difficulty, "Rhaenyra, I think Rhaegar is a fine boy, brave and clever." "Of course, Rhaegar is restless, but he always has a plan," Rhaenyra replied, smiling at the thought of her brother. He was the only blood relative her mother had left her, the one she would rely on. Viserys paled slightly when he heard his daughter say that Rhaegar was restless. He drained his glass. Rhaenyra, you are a smart, kind girl. Have you ever felt that being the heir brings you pressure, making it difficult to breathe? Viserys kept his smile, asking tentatively. From time to time, yes, but you have been supportive, and Rhaegar has helped me. I am blessed to have you both, Rhaenyra replied with a smile, clasping her hands behind her back. These words pierced Viserys' heart like a sharp blade. He struggled to breathe, his chest tightening. The dream has come back to me. Rhaegar is the prince of the prophecy. I need to make a decision. Viserys repeated these words in his mind and then pushed himself up and opened his mouth. Bang! The goblet fell heavily on the table. Viserys looked up, his face serious. Rhaenyra, I need to be honest with you. The reason I called you here is to discuss changing the heir. After holding back for so long, Viserys finally opened up and felt a mix of relief and anguish. At least he'd said it. It was better to be honest, even if it was painful, than to hide the truth. Rhaenyra froze at his words, her breath seeming to stop as disbelief appeared in her eyes. What had she heard? Her father, who had always supported her, was talking about changing the heir. She was going to be replaced. Viserys stood up and walked quickly to Rhaenyra, speaking with difficulty. Rhaenyra, I know this is hard to accept. You've been the heir for 6 years. But your position was always precarious. I had to consider a more suitable heir. As your father, I hope you understand. I love you, and I'm not making this decision lightly. Viserys saw his daughter's shocked expression and tried to explain further, trying to soften the impact of his words. After a few moments, Rhaenyra blinked and processed the news. She lifted her head and looked her father straight in the eye. There was no complaining, no crying, no hysteria. Rhaenyra was calm. She placed a hand over her heaving chest to steady herself. With her other hand, she grasped her father's, forcing a smile as she asked, Father, is it Rhaegar? Chapter 104, The Future Dream. Dragonstone Island, coastline. The black dragon soared through the sky, weaving between clouds and sea. After a while, it landed on a cliff, settling on the rocky ground. Rhaegar was lying on the dragon's back, closing his eyes to feel the cool breeze on his face. The cannibal roared softly and lowered its body to the ground, connecting its head and tail, ready to sleep. The ground, connecting its head and tail, ready to sleep. Rhaegar lay still, eyes closed, and gradually slipped into a dream. He had a brief dream. He saw the castle on Dragonstone Island. His sister, Rhaenyra, was captured by a group of men. A sharp blade sliced through her skin, and blood soaked her skirt. She struggled, screamed, and cursed something he couldn't hear. Rhaegar watched from a distance, unable to help. Out of nowhere, a dragon's mouth opened and bit into Rhaenyra's shoulder. The dragon's fangs tore through her body, causing a lot of pain. Rhaenyra's face went pale as she screamed and cursed the person who had betrayed her. Brother, I curse you. You will fall into the 7 hells. Her curses echoed in his mind. Rhaegar heard them loud and clear. She was cursing him, her brother. Rhaegar suddenly woke up, and the dream started to fade. In the final moments of the dream, he saw Rhaenyra torn apart by the dragon, her body swallowed piece by piece. Her desperate cries kept him awake as he suddenly woke up. No. The image of his sister's tragic death really upset him. Rhaegar sat up, his heart racing and his breathing heavy. Roar! The cannibal growled softly, sensing its master's distress. Rhaegar looked out into the distance, the vivid dream still fresh in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. He was alone with the wind, the waves, and the gentle rumble of the dragon beneath him. Rhaegar looked around. The blue sky and white clouds were calm, with no hint of the nightmare's gloom. Just another dream, he said to himself. He took a deep breath and tried to shake off the dream, to separate it from reality. He started to sweat, and he wiped it away, feeling the chill of his own skin. Rhaegar tried to calm his breathing and gradually shake off the fear that had gripped him. When did I fall asleep and have such a bad dream? He lowered his head, holding his forehead, his heart racing with the lingering fear. He couldn't believe he'd fallen asleep on the back of a dragon, let alone had such a horrifying vision. Rhaenyra was his closest relative and his only sister. But in his dream, she was eaten by a dragon, and she died a horrible death. He could still hear her final cry, cursing him, ringing in his ears. Rhaegar looked down at his hands, feeling anxious. Was she cursing me? Was he the one who condemned Rhaenyra to such a fate? No way. It can't be me. After a moment of thought, he sharpened his eyes and solidified his resolve to protect his sister. Rhaenyra will be in danger in the future. This shouldn't happen. He denied the notion that he was the brother in her dream. Rhaegar glanced at the sleeping cannibal beneath him and slid down one of the dragon's wings, heading toward the castle. He needed to see Rhaenyra and talk to his father again. When Rhaegar returned to the castle, he learned from Sir Cole that Rhaenyra had been called away by their father. His heart raced with worry, and without hesitation, he made his way to his father's room. As he approached the door, he saw Harold standing guard. The old knight noticed him coming down the hallway and was about to speak when Rhaegar raised a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture. Harold, experienced and perceptive, immediately fell silent and bowed his head, stepping aside. "Thank you," Rhaegar whispered as he reached the door. Just then, he heard Rhaenyra's voice from inside. "I had long guessed this day would come, but I didn't expect it to come so soon." Rhaegar felt a sinking feeling in his heart. He reached out to push the door open, but Harold gently held his shoulder, signaling him to wait. Rhaegar looked at him in confusion, but Harold's serious expression and silent gesture made him pause. "Rhaenyra, you're a great girl, but the Iron Throne needs a strong leader," Viserys said from inside. Rhaegar leaned against the wall and listened closely. "Father, I'm also a dragon rider," Rhaenyra replied, her voice firm. "I'd rather be a knight leading a charge than be seen as a liability." Viserys let out a sigh. "The world's prejudice is like a mountain. They think you're not fit to be a knight, let alone a queen. That's no reason to replace me." "You never listened to that kind of advice before," Rhaenyra replied, her voice wavering slightly. "I never doubted your fitness for the Iron Throne because you are a woman," Viserys said apologetically. "But I had a dream of a prince crowned with the Conqueror's crown, changing the world in blood and fire." "And that prince was Rhaegar?" Rhaenyra asked quietly. "Yes, the night before Rhaegar returned, I had that dream again. The prince was Rhaegar as an adult, and I could not mistake it." Rhaenyra laughed bitterly. "An absurd reason, as absurd as the one you used to choose me as your heir." "Rhaenyra, Rhaegar is my eldest son," Viserys began, but his voice trailed off. There was a sudden opening of the door in the middle of Viserys' sentence. The two people inside were startled by the sudden sound. They turned to see an expressionless Rhaegar standing straight in the doorway. "Rhaegar, I thought you'd left. What are you doing back here?" Viserys' expression shifted slightly, and he reprimanded in a low voice. Rhaenyra glanced at her brother slyly. She tried to form a smile, but her lips only twitched without success. "We're family, and I'm entitled to take part in these discussions," Rhaegar said, stepping into the room. He turned and closed the door behind him. He walked over to Rhaenyra and took one of her hands. Rhaenyra gave a little struggle, but Rhaegar held her hand firmly. Her hand was smooth, but it felt cold to his touch. He looked at her tear-streaked face and said, "Sister, I won't hurt you, and I don't want to take away what belongs to you." Rhaenyra looked back at him, her eyes filled with sadness. She just shook her head. Her father had already decided to replace her as heir, and there was no way to change his mind. "I'm tired, Rhaegar," she said, her eyes red with tears. She had thought about being angry, about venting her frustration. But that would only make her look bad and make her father dislike her even more. Since the day she became heir to the throne, she had never enjoyed a single day of peace. Now that her father had rejected her, she felt even more exhausted. She thought it was pathetic and ridiculous to have even considered sitting on the Iron Throne. She felt completely powerless, unable to even think about fighting with her brother to defend her claim. Seeing his sister in tears, Rhaegar felt a surge of anxiety and hugged her. Then, he let go of her hand and turned to face his father. "Father, it is not appropriate to change the heir, and I do not intend to take on such a heavy burden," Rhaegar said, trying to appeal to his father. Viserys shook his head. "It is not as simple as you think, Rhaegar. The Iron Throne needs a strong king to sit on it, and Rhaenyra isn't very decisive. She will only weaken the rule of House Targaryen rather than revitalize it." Chapter 105, Rhaenyra's Conditions. "I said I could help her. My dragon and I are enough to quell any rebellion," Rhaegar stated confidently. He was haunted by his dreams, unsure why Rhaenyra had suffered so. But he knew one thing for sure, as long as he stood by Rhaenyra's side, they were safe. They were born of fire and nothing could stop them. Viserys glared at his eldest son, seething with anger. "That ungrateful wretch! He was offering him the throne. Damon would even go so far as to seduce his own niece and murder his nephew just to get a chance at the crown. While Rhaegar, the eldest son and rightful heir, seemed uninterested in it. Maybe Rhaenyra didn't want the throne either. But it didn't matter, Rhaegar was still too young to understand the allure of power. At some point, he'll understand the importance of being an heir. Viserys sneered, his voice forceful. Changing the heir is not a suggestion, it is an order for you and Rhaenyra. No one can refuse the king's will. Rhaegar stood his ground, meeting his father's gaze with stubbornness. I will not obey. You cannot force the position of heir on me. You would defy me as well, Rhaegar. Viserys raised an eyebrow, his eyes darkening. If your orders mean hurting Rhaenyra, then yes, I will, Rhaegar replied. Very well, Viserys said coldly. Both of you siblings have defied your father and your king. You are truly brave. The scene of Rhaegar defending Rhaenyra seemed to agitate Viserys further, a chilling coldness flashing under his eyes. He aimed his words like a spear at Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, your brother has learned from your capriciousness, and that is one of the things I find most infuriating. Rhaenyra turned her face away, scowling. She felt like she was just a pawn in this family struggle, a victim of the political machinations. She knew that whatever she said would be wrong, so there was no point in speaking. She was caught between defending her brother and her father's harsh decree. She was at a crossroads, uncertain of her future. Viserys' gaze shifted back to Rhaegar. I will not tolerate your defiance. If you disobey my will, you will face consequences you cannot imagine. Rhaegar looked confused, not understanding why his father was acting this way. Viserys continued, as a heir, Rhaenyra's marriage has always been a big deal. Now that she's no longer the heir, she'll be marrying as a princess. Rhaenyra Velaryon, Jason Lannister or Tyland, and even Prince Martell of Dorne are all good options. Rhaegar and Rhaenyra's expressions changed dramatically. They stared at their father, who had always been kind, now dictating their futures. Involved in her own marriage, Rhaenyra reacted strongly, her voice tinged with sorrow. You have the right to change the heir, but why make it difficult for your daughter? I have already lost the throne. Your indecision is what's got us here, Viserys said. He was determined to teach his unruly children a lesson. Of course, he wouldn't truly use Rhaenyra as a mere pawn in marriage. She was his daughter, his eldest with his late wife, Aemma Oren. But to ensure Rhaegar complied, a degree of coercion was necessary. And it worked like a charm, the effect was immediate. Rhaegar stood there, looking at his father with a mix of hesitation and uncertainty. It was hard to reconcile the kind man he had always known with this cold, ruthless figure. Rhaegar felt a sense of powerlessness wash over him. For the first time, he really grasped the significance and reality of power. Rhaegar slowed down and said with difficulty, Father, why do you want me to inherit the Iron Throne? He couldn't understand why his father was so determined to make him the heir. Because you're the Prince of Prophecy and the first heir. You deserve to sit on the Iron Throne, Viserys said firmly. You alone tamed the largest wild dragon ever seen, and you have conquered numerous nobles and savages in the Crack Claw Point. Given your achievements, shouldn't you be the heir to the throne? Viserys believed that Rhaegar was the prince from his dreams, destined to elevate House Targaryen to greatness. Rhaegar hesitated for a moment before saying, Father, if you seek peace in the kingdom, I can serve as guardian of all the realm. If you want the Targaryen family to reclaim its prestige, I can defeat the pirates of the Stepstones and the raiders of the Iron Islands. I can even conquer Dorne with the dragons and bring the Seven Kingdoms firmly under Targaryen rule. And if you think that's not enough, I can take on the Free Cities, the Slavers' Bay, and the lands of Essos. Even if it takes my entire life, I will bring these lands under the rule of House Targaryen. At this point, he looked back at Rhaenyra and said earnestly, but for all this to happen, please do not deny Rhaenyra her rightful place. Give me a little more time, I will grow into my role soon. Please, Father, really, please. The words of the young prince were heartfelt and sincere, without the slightest hint of falsehood. But whether it moved the king, who had already made up his mind, remained to be seen. Behind him, Rhaenyra was already in tears, covering her cheeks with one hand, unable to stop the tears from rolling down as she looked at her younger brother. Alas! Viserys sighed deeply, feeling his eldest son's resistance. He turned to Rhaenyra and hesitantly asked, Rhaenyra, what do you say? His stance with Rhaegar was clear, but now it was Rhaenyra's turn to take a stand. The heirship is Rhaegar's, and I will return it to him and support him as he has supported me, Rhaenyra said without hesitation, holding back her sobs. At this point, the status of a heir no longer mattered. With Rhaegar's words, despite her 1,000 reluctances, she was satisfied. It was enough. Rhaenyra! Rhaegar shouted, unwilling to accept her decision. Rhaenyra shook her head vigorously, choking back her tears. Rhaegar, from the moment I became heir, I've fought against prejudice. I wanted to be a beloved queen, to abolish unjust rules, to establish a new order. But I don't have the wisdom of a true queen, nor the sensitivity of Aunt Rhaenys. You're my brother, and I can't accept you sacrificing your life to fulfill my ideals. She might not have the wisdom to be a great ruler, but she wasn't blind. Rhaegar was better suited to be the heir. He was speaking for her benefit, and she couldn't just take over his life. At this moment, she had to stand up for her brother. Rhaegar's eyes reddened as he said softly, Rhaenyra. Don't get emotional, I have my own plans. Rhaenyra wiped away her tears and took him into her arms. She turned to their father, staring him down. As compensation for stepping aside, you must fulfill my conditions. As part of the deal, you have to meet my conditions. Viserys stood there, silent, gripping the round table. It was as if he were in a different time and place from his children. He wasn't sure if he'd made the right call in removing his daughter's heirship and replacing it with his eldest son's. This was in line with his character. When he faced a problem, he was prone to self-doubt. He snapped back to reality when he heard his daughter speak. His eyes were a little vacant until Rhaenyra repeated herself. He nodded repeatedly and smiled in a conciliatory manner. I've already got a solution for you. Chapter 106, Rhaegar's Promise. Viserys laid out the compensation plan for his children to see. After the exchange ceremony, you'll keep your honorary position as Princess of Dragonstone, and Dragonstone will be your fiefdom for life. Rhaenyra listened quietly, holding Rhaegar like a doll, with no visible reaction. Viserys paused, looking at Rhaegar. Rhaenyra, if you still want to go ahead with your previous choice, I'll respect your decision and give you the right of first refusal. Rhaenyra looked at Rhaegar's face and shook her head. Not enough. Being Princess of Dragonstone and having Rhaegar as her protector was already her due. This was not true compensation. She had other conditions in mind. Maybe we should talk about the terms together, Rhaenyra, Viserys said gently, not letting her rejection of his initial offer get to him. Rhaenyra looked at her father, noting his guilty expression. She knew this was her chance to secure her future. If she lost her status as heir, she had to make the most of this opportunity. Nuzzling her brother's flushed face, she turned to her father and said firmly, along with your offer of compensation, I want your promise that you will never interfere with my marriage. Viserys frowned slightly. Allowing Rhaenyra autonomy in her marriage was already a significant concession. Her demand for complete freedom in choosing her spouse caught him off guard. Father, Rhaenyra has lost enough, Rhaegar said softly, bowing his head as if discussing something trivial. Losing her heirship had shamed him, and he wanted nothing more than to fulfill all her conditions. Viserys stared at his son for a moment before bursting into laughter. Although the laughter was a bit forced, he showed his most generous side. He opened his mouth to speak. Night. Rhaenyra, in a silk nightgown, sat in front of her dressing table, combing her silver hair. Her eyes were red and puffy as she stared silently at her reflection in the mirror. Knock, knock. A knock on her door broke the silence. Rhaenyra looked back and whispered, Please come in. She knew only one person would come to her room at this hour. Yet, the door remained still. Confused, Rhaenyra stood up and walked toward the door. She hesitated with her hand on the handle, wondering if something was wrong. Is something wrong? She asked softly, leaning her head against the door. Nothing but silence. Rhaenyra turned the knob and tried to open the door. Bang! Just as she was about to open the door, she noticed a small crack forming on the outside. Through the gap, Rhaenyra could see a white shadow standing at the edge of the corridor, about 10 meters away. It was Cole who stepped aside to let the visitor in. Since there weren't any outsiders around, Rhaenyra said, Rhaegar, if you have something to say, talk to me in person. Still no movement. Growing impatient and slightly angry, Rhaenyra said, Rhaegar, if you don't speak, I'm going to sleep. After leaving their father's room, Rhaegar had left without a word. She hadn't eaten lunch or dinner, waiting for her little brother to come to her door so they could have a heart-to-heart chat. The door opened slightly from the outside, revealing a sliver of space. Rhaenyra took half a step back, staring intently at the doorway. Rolling. With a soft, metallic sound, a gold coin rolled into the room, spinning in an erratic manner. Rhaenyra crouched down and picked up the coin quickly. As she lifted her head, 2 more gold coins rolled into the room. She quickly reached out and grabbed them. Upon closer examination, Rhaenyra realized that the coins were not like the unique golden dragons of Westeros. They didn't look like the coins from the Free Cities or Essos either. One side of the coin bore the number 1, and the other side featured a tower encircled by dragons, towering into the clouds to form a magnificent fortress. Rhaenyra rattled the coins in her hand and asked through the doorway, "Where are these gold coins from? I've never seen them before." "It's a relic from ancient Valeria," said a familiar, muffled voice from outside the door. Rhaenyra recognized the voice and smiled, trying to push the door open further. Bang! The door was shut again from the outside. The voice whispered, "These 3 gold coins are the compensation I brought you." 3 antiques. Rhaenyra weighed the coins in her hand and said with amusement, "A good compensation, I accept." Although the coins were useless in a practical sense, she wanted to make her brother feel better. "No. 3 gold coins are not worth anything at all," his voice grew agitated. "Father promised you 3 conditions as compensation, and so did I." "What do you want?" Rhaenyra asked. "I don't yet have the right or the wealth to make it up to you, but I will grow up soon. Keep these 3 gold coins, and when I am older, I promise to fulfill your 3 wishes." His words were a bit childish, but his voice was full of determination. After a day of ups and downs, Rhaenyra's expression grew somber as she sighed softly. She turned around and slowly slid her back against the door until she was seated on the floor. Holding the 3 gold coins in her hand, she sat back and thought about what to do next. She wasn't the only one struggling with the change in the heir position. Besides her father, who initiated the change, her younger brother, who adored her, was also affected. Rhaenyra leaned her head against the door, closed her eyes, and said, "I'll keep them." As she spoke, her thoughts wandered. She was afraid. Afraid that this would hinder Rhaegar's growth. Despite the tumult of her teenage years, she at least had a good childhood, filled with love from her kind father and strict mother. She had inherited her father's gentle nature and her mother's bravery and pride from the Velaeryons family. But Rhaegar was different. He was born without a mother and began suffering from illnesses as a baby. Fearing the pain of losing his eldest son, Viserys avoided seeing Rhaegar, leaving him fatherless in all by name. That changed 6 months ago. Rhaenyra tried to make up for Rhaegar's lack of motherly love by caring for him as a sister. It was clear that Rhaegar was fiercely protective of her today. They loved each other deeply. But how would they face each other in the future? Rhaenyra worried that Rhaegar might become paranoid. The Targaryen bloodline of madness always lurked within each member, waiting to surface. Rhaenyra stopped talking and thought about the future. Outside the door, a small figure crouched on the ground, leaning against the door. He listened for the sound of breathing on the other side. Scattered at his feet were sapphires, ancient books, jewelry, and even a precious space bracelet. He had hoped to use these to repair the damage done to Rhaenyra, but they didn't carry the same weight as the 3 gold coins. His eyes were dark and uncertain as he wrapped his arms around his legs, murmuring to himself. "Sister, I don't want the throne, but I will hold on to it. Any opposition in the future will have to face Dragonfire." His voice grew steadier, traveling through the door to Rhaenyra. "My promise stands. If you want it, I also want it." Word count, 1244. Comment. 7 comment. Vote. Chapter 107, Chapter 107, Not a Chapter, Author's Note, Reflections and Gratitude. Not a chapter, Author's Note. Hello guys, this is not a chapter, it's just a thank you note. I'm sharing it for those interested and also to not lose track of the chapters. Consider chapter 107 non-existent. I'll follow the same count as the Ross to avoid confusion. When I release this note, I will publish at least 2 chapters daily as I normally do, without taking the note into account. Number Chapter 107, Reflections and Gratitude. Today is a day of both joy and nervousness for the author. As a newcomer to writing, many of you may have noticed my inexperience. Initially, my goal was simply to earn some living expenses. My first attempt at a novel, despite pouring tens of thousands of words into it, was rejected, leaving me disheartened and doubtful of my abilities. After several failed attempts, I began to question whether I was cut out for this line of work. Then, by chance, I stumbled upon a captivating clip from House of the Dragon on a short video platform. The sight of the dragons reignited my passion, and I quickly subscribed to watch the entire series. It took me over a week to finish all 10 episodes. While I enjoyed the show, I felt that the plot was a bit too dark and lacked the passion I craved. For the next 2 weeks, I remained in a negative state. Then, I saw another clip from the show and realized that fan fiction based on popular series was still thriving online. This inspired me to write my own story set in the same universe. After much hesitation, I finally decided to draft an outline. Thus, this book was born, beginning with the troubled dreams of the melancholy prince, Rhaegar. To be honest, I never expected this book to do so well. The current success has far exceeded my expectations. Particularly after the initial chapters, when I wrote the dragon taming chapter, which became a surprising highlight despite not meeting my usual standards. This unexpectedly propelled the book to new heights. However, I soon encountered difficulties. The plot set on the peninsula, originally planned for 10 chapters, stretched to 20, leading to some dissatisfaction among readers. My lack of experience in writing and understanding of popular tropes became evident. I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you. Your support and encouragement have meant the world to me. I promise not to rest on my laurels and will strive to improve, updating the book as often as possible. I will also read and study more excellent works to create even more exciting plots. In the days ahead, I plan to increase the update frequency, aiming for 3 to 4 chapters a day. Thank you once again for your support. Let's continue this journey together. Chapter 108, Returning to King's Landing. 3 days had passed. After a long journey, the royal ship finally docked at the bustling port of King's Landing. Viserys was pale and tired as he was helped by Alicent into a carriage that was taking them to the Red Keep. Aegon, Helena, and Aemond were inside the carriage, attended to by servants, while Rhaenyra and Lionel, the hand of the king, were conspicuously absent. Viserys settled into the seat, visibly uncomfortable, as Alicent offered him a glass of water. After taking a sip, Viserys glanced around, his gaze falling on the empty seats. "Where's Rhaenyra? Where have they gone?" Alicent let out a soft sigh and handed the cup to a servant. "The siblings left ahead of us, riding a dragon ashore." There was a hint of bitterness in her tone, and anyone listening could tell. 3 nights ago, Viserys told Alicent that he was changing Rhaenyra's status as a heir to make Rhaegar the new heir. Alicent was caught off guard by the news, especially after Rhaegar's recent threats against her. Despite her misgivings, Alicent had no choice but to go along with it. The following day, Viserys dispatched ravens to disseminate the news across the realm, cancelling their planned journey to Driftmark in the process. Lionel had sent his condolences to the Sea Snake, letting the Velaeryons know about the change in the heir's status. However, time constraints had led to delays in various matters, including Aegon's dragon bonding. Aegon's progress in taming Sunfire had been slow, so they had to leave early to avoid further delays. This fact weighed heavily on Alicent's mind. After all, Rhaegar had successfully tamed a wild dragon at the tender age of 6, while Aegon struggled to tame even a young one. The question was on everyone's mind: why had Rhaegar succeeded where Aegon had not? Dragon Pit. Rhaenyra was perched atop Cyric's saddle, wearing sleek black dragon barding. After days of turmoil, her demeanor appeared to have regained its composure. With a bright smile, she looked around at the gathered dragons and their dragon keepers, who had come together at the sound of her call. Roar! Cyrix wasn't happy about the dragon keepers with the whips and clubs, so she let out a roar before slowly landing on the ground. Dismounting from the dragon's back, Rhaenyra scanned her surroundings and inquired, "Where's Rhaegar?" "He returned to King's Landing before me." A young maester, with a slight limp and a courteous smile, approached her. "The prince has departed. He was escorted back to the Red Keep by the waiting King's Guard." Without hesitation, Rhaenyra accepted the news. "Make sure my dragon is taken care of." With that, she left the dragon pit. However, she stopped in the middle of leaving and turned back with a serious look on her face. "If Rhaegar seeks to ride his dragon alone, do your utmost to dissuade him from reckless ventures, or summon me." It had been 3 days since she last saw Rhaegar. Upon their return to King's Landing, he took off on cannibal, leaving her behind. The black dragon was incredibly fast, and Rhaenyra was really annoyed. The young maester nodded enthusiastically. "I'll do my best to give the prince some advice." "Very well. Your dedication will not go unnoticed, Rhaenyra said, her lips curling into a satisfied grin as she continued on her way. As she left, the young maester went up to the dragon pit. The summit of the dragon pit. A massive black dragon was sprawled out on its back, eyes closed in repose. At the front of the platform, Rhaegar was there, watching Rhaenyra leave. Next to him, Eric, looking sharp in silver armor and white robes, stood tall, peeking at the imposing dragon from time to time, his face serious. Tap tap tap. Footfalls echoed up the stairs, prompting Eric to turn around, his gaze fixed on the approaching figure. Emerging from the staircase, a young maester tentatively advanced, stealing anxious glances at the ebony dragon occupying the landing. In hushed tones, he delivered the news, "Prince, the princess has departed." "I saw it, Maynard," Rhaegar replied, his tone calm and unmoved. Maynard sensed that the prince wasn't interested in talking anymore, so he backed off and stood by respectfully. Eric scrutinized his movements closely, his mind full of suspicion. A few moments later, Rhaegar turned to face Maynard. His gaze fell on Maynard's awkward gait. "It appears you've had a hard time." "This is the consequence of my actions," Maynard retorted wryly, his demeanor betraying no hint of sadness. During the Dreamfire incident, he had been incarcerated and subsequently maimed during the trial, leaving him with a permanent disability after failing to receive treatment in time. Observing Maynard's meek countenance, Rhaegar arched a brow. "I assumed you would have returned to the Citadel." "Not exactly. I'm no longer welcome there. I've grown accustomed to serving in the Dragon Pit," Maynard admitted. Rhaegar nodded thoughtfully, meeting his eager gaze. It was a hunger for power. After a brief pause, Rhaegar made his way toward the staircase, saying goodbye to Maynard as he left. "Make sure you do your job well. The Dragon Pit is really important for the royal family, so I'll be focusing on that from now on." After the change of power, the Dragon Pit would be under his control, a key asset he wanted to use. To him, it was just a normal request, but to Maynard, it meant a lot more. Eagerly lifting his head, Maynard pledged, "Yes, Prince. I will not disappoint you." "Too close, Maester," Eric interjected, halting Maynard's advance toward the prince. Rhaegar's voice came down the stairs, "The Dragon Pit needs someone reliable to look after it now that I'm the heir." Maynard, brimming with enthusiasm, disregarded Eric's restraining gesture, exclaiming, "Prince, I shall be your most loyal aide." Maynard was a maester with a lot of information at his fingertips. News of the heir change had already reached King's Landing, and Maynard had been privy to it. His waiting in the Dragon Pit had paid off, as evidenced by Rhaegar's acknowledgement. He had a bright future ahead of him. As the sun set, Viserys, tired from his journey, looked for a way to relax with a soothing broth before heading to bed early. Meanwhile, Alicent was looking after her husband while he was asleep, managing the Red Keep until the late hours. Once she'd finished her chores, Alicent was pretty tired as she made her way back to her own quarters. Despite her desire to collapse onto her soft bed and go to sleep, her royal status and upbringing demanded a modicum of decorum. With a graceful demeanor, she approached the table and took off her clothes, revealing the smooth expanse of her skin beneath. As her dress pooled at her feet, Alicent noticed an envelope on the tabletop with the crimson seal of House Hightower, a tower emblem. She quickly grabbed the letter, recognizing it as a message from her family. Her heart was racing with excitement, as it had been far too long since she'd heard from her parents and siblings. She broke the seal with shaking hands and took the letter out, then sat down on the cool stone bench to read it. However, her initial excitement slowly faded as she read the words her father, Otto Hightower, had written. The letter didn't offer much words of comfort or reassurance. It was just a brief acknowledgement of the uncertain political climate. "The situation is pretty tricky, so choose your words carefully," it said. "Be careful and take your time," it advised, offering little help. Chapter 109, The Heir Replacement Ceremony. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. At the harbour of King's Landing, a sailboat from a faraway land docked, and a guest disembarked. The arrival of outsiders brought a buzz of activity to the harbour, with the number of traders increasing day by day. At the city gates of King's Landing, soldiers escorted a procession of ornate carriages into the city. These carriages bore various noble emblems: roaring lions, dire wolves, and sky-blue falcons. After 2 months of anticipation, nobles from all over the continent had gathered in King's Landing to participate in the king's announcement regarding the heir change. Inside the Red Keep, servants were bustling about, decorating the castle and preparing banquet ingredients. As queen, Alicent was in charge of all affairs. During this period, she was the busiest person in all of King's Landing. Having just finished coordinating the banquet performances, Alicent wiped the sweat from her forehead. She called over a maid and urgently said, "Where's Rhaenyra? Tell her to come and help me. I can't finish everything on my own." Her husband, the king, was a hands-off ruler who made decisions but left the execution to others. She needed someone to assist her. The maid, head bowed, replied, "The princess has gone to the dragon pit to look for the prince." "Seven hells, is there no one in the Red Keep to help me?" Alicent exclaimed in frustration, her chest heaving with anger. Meanwhile, at the dragon's lair, Rhaenyra made her way up the stairs to the top landing, her steps slow and deliberate. She was well aware of the bustling activity at the Red Keep, but she felt no obligation to partake in it. After all, she was the princess who had been replaced. How could anyone expect her to organize a banquet for her own replacement? The thought was simply too cruel. Reaching the empty platform, Rhaenyra spotted a familiar figure. "Rhaegar, you're really here," she called out, surprised. Rhaegar turned at her voice, a hint of helplessness in his expression. "I only have 2 places I can go, and since I'm not needed at the Red Keep, of course I'm here." Rhaenyra quickly stepped forward and grabbed her brother's ear in frustration. "You spend more than half your time in the dragon pit, Rhaegar. Do you consider this place your home now?" Rhaegar winced in pain but managed to reply, "Soon the whole continent will be mine. It doesn't matter where I make my home." "Nonsense. Father still has a few decades left to live." "It's not your turn yet," Rhaenyra scolded, pushing him slightly. Rhaegar didn't resist, closing his eyes and enduring her anger in silence. Seeing him so passive only fueled Rhaenyra's frustration. She released his ear and pressed down on his shoulder, speaking seriously, "Rhaegar, the day after tomorrow is the heir replacement ceremony. You need to be prepared and focused." "I know, I don't need you to remind me," Rhaegar responded with an indifferent smile. Rhaenyra squatted down, looked directly into his eyes, and said sadly, "I never blamed you. Don't be like this, okay?" Since their return to King's Landing, the siblings had rarely seen each other. Rhaenyra knew it was because Rhaegar was intentionally avoiding her. She even considered moving to the dragon pit just to be close to him. "I'm fine, Rhaenyra," Rhaegar sighed. "I've been observing the dragon's habits lately and planning to restructure the dragon pit." He wasn't lying. The dragon pit was crucial, and as a family that relied on dragons to conquer the continent, he compared the importance of renovating to the period in which the Red Keep was built. Rhaenyra put his hand on Rhaegar's face and asked, "So, have you noticed anything?" "Not yet. The dragon pit here is too simple, far from what I had in mind," Rhaegar admitted, shaking his head. The dragon lords of Velaeryons lived in the 14 Flames, with natural volcanic and underground caves forming perfect dragon lairs. In contrast, King's Landing's dragon's lair was just a massive dome filled with ground-level holes, lacking the spacious, high-temperature environment ideal for dragons. Rhaenyra sighed as she looked at her brother, who seemed so serious. The thing she least expected had happened. Rhaegar was avoiding her, no longer as affectionate as he used to be. She took him by the shoulders, embraced him, and kissed his neck. "Rhaegar, I'm the one who's been replaced. You shouldn't avoid me. It's really cruel to me." Rhaegar, lost in thought, turned his head to the stone wall, unsure how to respond. He didn't mean to avoid her, he just didn't know how to face her. Now, he was at a loss for words. After a while, he heard a soft sob. Rhaegar turned back and saw tears on Rhaenyra's cheeks. She pulled a gold coin from her pocket and offered it to him. "Do you want me to make a wish?" she choked out. Rhaegar stared at the coin in a daze. After a long moment, he embraced her and whispered, "No, I understand." Rhaenyra held him tightly and admonished, "You're the one our mother left me to rely on. No matter what, you shouldn't run away from me. You will be the heir, and your every word and action represents the royal family." Rhaegar buried his face in her hair and said, "I understand. I am the flame that all should look up to." He accepted his status as heir and was determined to live up to it. 2 days later, in the morning, the gates of the Red Keep were opened wide, welcoming the nobles arriving for the ceremony. Leading the procession were the prominent families, each bearing their respective crests on their attire. Following them were nobles from various regions, accompanying their lords. The nobles were led by the king's guard to the expansive back garden, rather than into the castle hall. This area boasted a large schoolyard, an arbor, a pond, and a fish beam, providing a picturesque setting for the gathering. King Viserys and Queen Alicent awaited the attendees in a pavilion, accompanied by their children, Aegon, Helena, and Aemond, who was in the arms of a maid. Your Grace and Queen. At the sight of the royal couple, the nobles bowed deeply, creating a scene of grand and solemn respect. Many of these nobles hailed from the north, the west, and the Vale regions far from King's Landing, with treacherous roads making their journey arduous. Viserys surveyed the gathered bannermen, pride swelling within him. He glanced at his wife and then addressed the assembly in a loud voice. All of you, I am honored to see you here after your long and bumpy journey. I offer my heartfelt thanks and blessings. Today is a great event for the Targaryen dynasty, and you're all here to witness it. Chapter 110, The Dragons. King Viserys spoke many kind words to appease the bannermen who had travelled from afar. The nobles responded graciously, applauding and cheering as the king finished his speech. After a moment of calm, Hand of the King Lionel stepped forward to preside over the meeting. Clearing his throat, he announced the main agenda. My lords, today is the last day of the year, and so we will hold the heir replacement ceremony as scheduled. The nobles reacted differently. Lord Jason Lannister wore a joyful expression, quietly discussing with those around him whether the princess would accept his proposal now that she had lost her heirship. A Targaryen princess was important not just for the king's favor, but also for adding dragon blood to future generations of his family. The Maiden of the Vale, Rhaenyra, seemed pretty downcast. She was Rhaenyra and Rhaegar's cousin. She was 17 years old and a tall beauty with brown curly hair. As a woman, she'd always been Rhaenyra's most loyal supporter, both facing challenges from men and needing to stick together. It's a shame that Rhaenyra lost her heirship, Jane whispered to the middle-aged man standing beside her. The man was Yorbert Royce from Runestone, the Lord Protector of the Vale and assistant to the Maiden of the Vale. With a heavy countenance, Yorbert lowered his voice. The king has a son, this replacement is not surprising. Jenny sighed, understanding reality. In addition to the main nobles' houses, the lords of each realm were also present. Lord Stark of the North and Lord Baratheon of the Stormlands appeared indifferent, as if the choice of the king's heir did not concern them. The Starks rarely ventured south, preferring to stay active in the north. Lord Baratheon, once a supporter of the uncrowned queen, Princess Rhaenys, was also uninterested. They were cousins, but his loyalties lay elsewhere. Lord Tully of the Riverlands and Lord Tyrell of the Reach, however, were all smiles, paying close attention to the speeches. They were supporters of the Targaryen house and favoured a male heir, which aligned with their interests. Lionel wrapped up his speech pretty quickly, which let the two main characters come on stage. Viserys was smiling and holding Alicent's shoulders as they stood in front of the gathered nobles. Lionel stood by, maintaining a solemn demeanour. Where are the princess and the prince? Has no one summoned their presence? Have they been forgotten? The murmurs grew as the princess and prince did not show up immediately. Some nobles began to whisper and speculate. Don't be in a hurry, my lords. The princess and the prince are on their way, Lionel announced, attempting to quell the confusion. The nobles exchanged doubtful glances, puzzled by Lionel's words. What did he mean by on their way? Was the princess refusing to relinquish her heirship and boycotting the heir-changing ceremony? Maybe there's something worth seeing, someone in the crowd suggested. This comment sparked a wave of murmurs, as other nobles began to speculate quietly. Eyes occasionally darted to the king and queen in the pavilion, anticipating a potential royal scandal. Out of nowhere, a gust of wind swept through the garden, causing the trees to rustle and the grass to sway. People looked up as the wind picked up. Roar! A powerful roar echoed across the sky, and in full view of the gathered crowd, a golden figure broke through the clouds, descending towards the majestic red keep. It's a dragon! The sharp-eyed among them quickly identified the enormous creature. This is the princess's dragon, Syrax. The nobles who had resided in the king's domain for years were well acquainted with the golden dragon. Rhaenyra often travelled with her dragon, Syrax. However, many nobles from the borderlands were less familiar with dragons. As Syrax, towering and majestic, swooped down, the crowd was visibly shaken. This was a real dragon. One breath of dragon fire could wipe everyone out. Roar! Syrax sensed the crowd's attention and let out a loud roar, spitting flames that lit up the sky, showing off its impressive size and power. Rhaenyra, clad in black and red, rode in the saddle, her hands gripping the reins as she looked down at the assembly below. Land, Syrax! After circling the Red Keep twice, Rhaenyra gave the command in High Velaeryons, her expression cold and commanding. Roar! Syrinx replied by folding its wings and landing on a tower of the Red Keep, crushing the bricks and tiles. It scanned the crowd below, tilting its head with curiosity. The nobles looked up at the beast on the tower, their faces tense. It was a bit unsettling to be scrutinized by a dragon. After a moment, Syrinx lost interest and looked away. At Rhaenyra's command, it spread its wings and leapt from the tower, gliding around before landing gracefully in an open space nearby. Boom! As the dragon touched down, a gust of wind kicked up dust, forcing the nobles to step back. Viserys watched the nobles, who seemed a bit confused, and allowed a small smile to form at the corners of his mouth. He looked at Rhaenyra on the dragon's back and they shared a look. Rhaenyra remained silent, sitting regally in the saddle, her chin lifted as if dismissing the nobles below. "Oh, is this a warning?" Jason Lannister muttered something under his breath. He was blown back by the dust and had to lean on his attendants to stay upright. He acknowledged that a dragon was a formidable and intimidating force, but what did it matter in the grand scheme of things? In his mind, he knew a woman, even one in command of a dragon, would ultimately be subjugated by a man. Jason's eyes burned with greed and desire as he stared at Rhaenyra. Young and unmarried, he saw the princess's loss of heirship as an opportunity. With his status as the Warden of the West, he believed he could capture the heart of the now vulnerable princess. "My lords, the princess is already here, and the prince will arrive shortly," Lionel announced, adjusting his wrinkled collar. Since Rhaenyra had arrived on dragonback, it was clear there would be more than one dragon present. Roar! The crowd's murmurs were interrupted by another thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very air, rattling their eardrums. Hoo! A gust of wind followed, and the clear sunlight was suddenly obscured by a massive dark cloud, casting half of the Red Keep into shadow. Dragon! Another dragon! Where did this black dragon come from? Does King's Landing have such a large black dragon? People looked up and saw a huge dragon, like a mountain of coal, coming into view. Its black scales, green eyes, and grey horns showed it was an adult dragon. Roar! Cannibal, following Syrinx's path, burst through the clouds, green dragon fire splashing across the sky like ink. It was the undeniable centerpiece of King's Landing, circling above the city in its immense size and imposing presence. The whole city was looking at the black dragon with blue eyes. "Is it the Black Dread, Velaeryons?" people asked. Those who didn't know about dragons were scared. They thought Cannibal was Velaeryons, the dragon who had burned everything in the Seven Kingdoms. "Don't be afraid, lords," Viserys reassured the panic-stricken nobles with a smile. "This dragon is Cannibal, tamed by my eldest son, Rhaegar. It is the largest wild dragon of Dragonstone Island." The king's words aimed to calm the crowd, but the sight of two formidable dragons had already left a lasting impression on everyone present. Chapter 111, Heir's Resignation. Today's meeting was a clear demonstration of King Viserys' authority. Since the war for the Stepstones, the royal family's prestige had waned. With the change of the heir, it was time for the Targaryen to reassert their dominance before the nobility. Hearing the king's speech, many nobles quickly understood his intention. Their eyes were fixed on the dark dragon hovering above. The dragon had a leather strap around its neck, attached to a saddle. A small figure sat on the dragon's back, commanding the beast. "Cannibal, Dracarys." Rhaegar spoke in High Velaeryons, issuing the command. He tightened his grip on the reins and scanned the crowd below, who were clearly restless. Roar! Cannibal, sensing his master's command, unleashed a torrent of green dragon fire that cut across the sky like a blazing river. To the onlookers, the flames seemed endless. In a dramatic display, the pitch-black dragon surged into the sea of flames, the small figure on its back unscathed. Rhaegar stayed put, safe from the dragon fire thanks to his special dragon riding suit. "Land, Cannibal," Rhaegar said softly once the flames died down, showing off the dragon's impressive power. Cannibal's green eyes twinkled with amusement as it looked down at the crowd below. The dragon changed direction, diving headfirst toward the ground. Cannibal was much bigger and stronger than Syrinx, which was still in its juvenile stage. It was like a storm, capable of overturning chariots. As Cannibal swooped down over the Red Keep, the wind from its descent began to whip through the back garden. The gathered nobles couldn't help but glance nervously at the king, realizing the gravity of the situation. Roar! Just as the black dragon was about to crash into the castle, it suddenly stopped in its tracks, roaring at the sky. It came down in the garden with a thud. Luckily, the back garden was spacious enough to fit Cannibal's immense body. Smoke rose from the ground as Cannibal landed behind the gazebo, its sheer size dwarfing Syrax. The pavilion looked pretty small, like a mouse or a cat compared to the massive dragon, which stood towering over it. Cannibal's head reached as high as the tower, and it gave the crowd below a disdainful glance. The dragon's presence was pretty intimidating. Nobles who dared to look directly at it couldn't help but back away in fear, especially when they saw the small figure on its back, a boy less than 10 years old. The sight of a child commanding such a fearsome beast was unsettling. It made you feel like you had a sword hanging over your head, ready to strike at any moment. Rhaegar, perched on Cannibal's back, remained silent, his gaze distant. Roar! Cannibal raised its head and let out a loud roar, spewing green dragon flames into the sky. The air heated up fast, turning the winter chill into a stifling summer heat, making everyone sweat. "All right, let me down, Cannibal," Rhaegar said in a calm voice, breaking the tension and halting the dragon's display. Roar! Cannibal stopped its flames, folded its wings, and laid down. The heat had also affected King Viserys, who wiped sweat from his forehead while beaming with pride. "Rhaegar, let the Lord see your face," Viserys commanded loudly. "Yes, father," Rhaegar replied, getting up from his horse. He hadn't fastened the chains, and Cannibal, attuned to his master's will, ensured Rhaegar's safety without them. The saddle was more for comfort than necessity. Rhaegar descended gracefully using a soft ladder attached to the straps around Cannibal's neck. With a soft thud, he landed and walked from the back of the pavilion into full view of the assembly. Dressed in a sleek dragon-scale patterned outfit, Rhaegar's clean, white face, silver hair, and purple eyes of the Targaryen lineage contrasted sharply with the menacing black dragon outside. Leaving Alicent's embrace, Viserys took Rhaegar's small hand and stood tall before the nobles, his pride evident. "My lords, behold your future monarch, the new king of the realm," he proclaimed loudly. The nobles understood the situation clearly under the imposing authority of the two dragons. They erupted into thunderous applause, acknowledging their future king. The sound of their applause echoed, confirming their acceptance of Rhaegar's status ascension. After a round of applause and cheers, Viserys raised his hand to calm the nobles, whose faces showed a mix of emotions. He patted Rhaegar's shoulder and encouraged him, "Go, Rhaegar, help Rhaenyra dismount." Rhaegar nodded and glanced at Rhaenyra, who was still sitting proudly on Syrax's back. She needed to maintain her dignity in this important moment. Rhaegar walked over to Syrax, looking up at his sister's calm face. As he reached Syrax's neck, he petted the curious dragon. He slowly dropped to one knee and said, "Rhaenyra, I'm here to help you." Rhaenyra turned her head and looked down at Rhaegar with a neutral expression. After a brief pause, she undid the chain around her waist, rose from the saddle, and climbed down the ladder. When she reached the ground, Rhaenyra extended her hand. Rhaegar took it, kissed the back of her hand lightly, and whispered, "Thank you, sister." "Rise, brother," Rhaenyra responded, pulling him up gracefully. Hand in hand, they walked towards the gazebo, matching each other's pace despite their height difference. When they got to the pavilion, Rhaenyra saluted Viserys and Alicent, then stepped forward to address the crowd before Lionel could. She scanned the assembly and spoke with passion, "My lords, I'm honored to have you here today for the heir-changing ceremony. Here and now, in front of you all, I, Rhaenyra Targaryen, eldest daughter of King Viserys I, Princess of Dragonstone, and former heir to the Iron Throne, solemnly declare that I relinquish my claim to the throne in favor of my brother Rhaegar. I pledge my lifelong allegiance to him, to support him, and to work together to usher in a new era for the Targaryen dynasty." With that, Rhaenyra confidently raised Rhaegar's small hand high, sealing her declaration. Chapter 112, The Hightower House. As Rhaenyra's declaration echoed through the hall, applause started up, with Rhaenyra and the Vale nobles leading the way, followed by the Riverlands and Reach houses of the Tullis and Tyrells. These were the staunchest supporters of the Targaryen crown. The princess's willingness to transfer the title of heir to her brother sent a strong message of unity. The Targaryen house showed no signs of internal strife or scandal. Today marked an honorable and orderly transition. "Well done, Rhaenyra!" Rhaenyra's clear voice called out, her eyes filled with pity for her cousin and ally. Both women were powerful in their own right and supported each other politically. Jane had no choice but to respect Rhaenyra's decision. As the applause died down, Lionel Strong looked at Rhaenyra with a sad expression. "Oh well, my role here has been taken over," he thought. Yet, he stepped forward with solemnity and addressed the nobles. "My lords, the princess and the prince have arrived. Please proceed to the throne hall for the ceremony." The replacement of the heir was a significant event, requiring a dignified and solemn ceremony. It wasn't enough for the heirs to simply agree, the kingdom needed to witness the formalities. "Come along, my children," Viserys said, approaching Rhaenyra and Rhaegar, taking their hands. Rhaenyra sensed the affection in her father's eyes. "You've done well, my girl. What you've lost today will be compensated," Viserys assured her, his voice firm as he squeezed her hand. Rhaenyra's sacrifice proved her loyalty and commitment to the unity of the Targaryen house, keeping external threats at bay. Viserys was proud of her, his guilt for her deepening. Rhaenyra smiled gently, slipping her hand out of her father's and instead holding Rhaegar's. "Father, it would be better if you accompanied the queen," she said softly. Her father's belated affection and hesitation hurt her, but she kept it to herself. The offer meant a life of peace and security, but her father's newfound love only made her resent him more. For now, all she wanted was to hold Rhaegar's hand tightly and fulfill her vow. The heir-changing ceremony commenced in the solemn throne room, where members of the royal family and nobles from across the realms had gathered. The High Septon of the Faith of the Seven stood before them, making the official proclamation under the divine gaze of the Seven. The title of heir was formally transferred from Rhaenyra to Rhaegar. Seizing the moment, Rhaenyra announced that she would no longer consider marrying outside her family and pledged to groom Rhaegar until he came of age. This announcement was a great disappointment to many nobles who had long coveted her hand in marriage. Viserys hadn't expected Rhaenyra to make that announcement, but he didn't object. Instead, he smiled and nodded in agreement, confirming that he wouldn't get involved in her marriage plans. For Viserys, it was important to keep the pure dragon bloodline going, and Rhaenyra's decision was perfect for him. After this unexpected turn of events, Viserys placed the crown on Rhaegar's head and got the oath of allegiance from the lords. Dressed in black robes adorned with the emblems of the realm, Rhaegar surveyed the room with a composed demeanor, his raised arms signifying his acceptance of the new title. From this moment on, he was the heir, just as Rhaenyra had once been. Viserys was thrilled beyond words as he witnessed the moment. This was the prince he had always dreamed of. The coronation was complete, and as the sun began to set, the nobles were invited to the banquet hall, where a sumptuous feast awaited them. Candlelight and bonfires cast a warm glow on the tables laden with food and wine. Viserys was at the head of the hall, with Rhaegar and Rhaenyra to his left and Lionel, the hand of the king, to his right. After the ceremony, Alicent excused herself to tend to Aemond, who was crying. Meanwhile, the nobles enjoyed the feast, eating, drinking, and chatting away. Viserys took in the scene with a sense of satisfaction, occasionally chatting with Lionel in a friendly manner. It was a day of triumph for him, and he wanted to share it with everyone. The only regret was the absence of the Velaeryons house. Sea Snake Corlys had promised to attend, but they had not yet arrived. "Rhaegar, try this," Rhaenyra said, offering her brother a piece of roasted meat. Rhaegar, dressed in ceremonial attire, lounged back in his chair with a bored expression, accepting the food from his sister. He was still adjusting to his new status as heir and was enjoying the attention from the former one. After eating several pieces of meat, Rhaegar felt overwhelmed and gulped down some grape juice. Rhaenyra teased, "The heir should pay attention to his image, Rhaegar. I haven't even felt the privileges of being crown prince, and already I'm being scolded." Rhaegar joked. "Look at all these people, how many of them do you think will actually listen to me?" Rhaenyra replied with a self-deprecating smile, "How many do you think listened to me when I was the heir?" Rhaegar smirked but said nothing. He understood that being the heir was merely a title and that real power was still far away. Just then, there was an announcement at the door. It was Lord Hobart Hightower from Old Town. Many nobles had been disheveled by the two dragons' arrival and had applied to return to their residences to change their attire. The Hightower delegation entered, led by the lords and ladies, but one figure stood out even more, Sir Otto Hightower, Queen Alicent's father. Viserys maintained a composed expression as his old acquaintance approached, waiting patiently for the customary greetings. Lord Hobart offered his blessings, followed by Sir Otto Hightower's formal greeting. Viserys responded calmly, showing no sign of discomfort or regret over their past conflicts. Rhaegar's attention was drawn to the newcomers. He tugged at Rhaenyra's skirt, pointed to Lord Hobart descending the steps, and whispered, "Look, it's that big-nosed fool, I remember him." Rhaegar. Rhaenyra quickly covered his mouth, her eyes giving him a stern look to let him know to watch what he say. Rhaegar pulled her hand away and whispered into her ear, "Isn't that man a supporter of Aegon?" He recalled the scene at the Kingswood hunt when Sir Hobart had hailed Prince Aegon. At the time, he hadn't recognized him. It turned out to be Lord Hightower of Aegon's mother's house. Rhaenyra lowered her voice, "You're the heir, and your succession is secure. Aegon can't challenge you." Rhaegar's status as the eldest son was far stronger than her own had been as the eldest daughter. Aegon, who once had some hope, couldn't surpass Rhaegar in age or legitimacy. Rhaegar glanced at Otto Hightower, a former hand of the king for 2 terms, as he chatted with Rhaenyra. Viserys raised his glass and greeted, "It's been a long time, Otto. I'm glad you're well, and that you've chosen an excellent heir, Your Grace," Otto replied respectfully, maintaining his elegant demeanor. Their conversation was brief before Otto followed his elder brother into the banquet. As the Hightower family settled in, another noble rose to make a toast. 2 women sat at the table of the Vale family, Lady Jane and a mature woman dressed as a noblewoman. "Your Grace." The lady began to stand, but another figure quickly stepped forward with a glass of wine. "Congratulations, Your Grace," he said, "you have a brave and fearless prince as your heir, worthy of the dragon blood." Chapter 113, Lady Rhea. A blonde, curly-haired nobleman named Jason strode forward and saluted the king. Rhaegar squinted at him and nodded. "Thank you, Lord Jason." Jason smiled and lifted his chin. "Your Grace, this exchange of heirs is truly grand, befitting a prince." Viserys laughed. "Of course, Rhaegar is my eldest son, the future king. I want this feast to go down in history." Jason glanced at the empty seat to the king's right. "Where is the queen? I was hoping to greet her in person." "The queen is still preparing for the festivities," Viserys replied casually. Jason took the opportunity to comment. "That's why men go to war, women would never make it to the battlefield in time." Turning to Rhaenyra, he asked, "With the burden of being the heir removed, I wonder what the princess has planned for the future." He was still thinking of marrying a Targaryen princess. Viserys opened his mouth to reply, but Rhaegar interrupted. "Lord Jason, what war have you started? Must I ride the dragons to Lannisport?" Rhaenyra gave him a sideways glance and silently took his hand. Rhaegar smiled and looked at Jason, who looked a bit stunned. Jason hesitated. I haven't started any war. There's no need to trouble the prince." "Really? That's a shame," Rhaegar replied, feigning disappointment. "Do you have any future plans for war? I heard the Ironborn often disturb the coastline." "The Ironborn are just foolish pirates. The soldiers in the harbor can handle them," Jason replied, sounding perplexed. "With your honor as a prince, you shouldn't be bothered by the Ironborn." "I see. Lord Jason is truly a lord well versed in military affairs." "I admire you," Rhaegar said, raising his cup in a toast. Jason looked at the fruity grape juice in the prince's glass and frowned, but he raised his glass to share the drink. After finishing the wine, Jason, aware that his presence is unwelcome to the prince, left, his mood noticeably dampened. Watching his retreating back, Rhaenyra whispered into Rhaegar's ear. "An egomaniac, I can deal with that. I just can't stand his stupid face," Rhaegar shrugged. "He dared to covet my sister. I'm afraid seawater from Lannisport got into his head." As soon as Jason left, the Lady of the Vale, who had been holding her tongue and wanted to speak earlier, quickly approached. "Your Grace, Rhea Royce of Runestone has come to visit with the prince." "I offer my blessings to you and your children," the lady said, raising her glass. "Thank you, Lady Rhea," Viserys responded. Rhaegar and Rhaenyra said the same thing, with equal respect. The countess before them was no ordinary person. She was Damon Targaryen's wife, Viserys' brother, and thus Rhaegar's aunt by marriage. As is proper, they should address her as sister-in-law and aunt. Rhaegar took a moment to look at Lady Rhea. Her long brown hair framed a slim figure. Though she wasn't conventionally beautiful, her features had a certain rugged grace, exuding a dry heroic spirit. She was a far cry from the unattractive figure Damon had described. Lady Rhea took a sip of wine and said solemnly, "Your Grace, Damon has committed a grave crime. While I bear no guilt, I feel a shared responsibility." "Don't worry, Lady Rhea," Viserys replied politely. "Damon's sins are his own. They won't touch you." Lady Rhea shook her head. "Your Grace, I know what I am about to say may sound treasonous, but I beg your understanding." "What is it you wish to say?" Viserys asked, sensing the seriousness of the situation. Lady Rhea spoke with heavy heart. I have been married to Damon for 10 years, but our marriage exists in name only. He finds me lacking in beauty and refuses to be with me. The scandal has spread across the continent. Rhaegar sat up straighter and listened intently. This was Damon's scandal, and he needed to hear the details. Lady Rhea continued, I am the Lady of Runestone, and this stigma has haunted me for years. Now that Damon has committed treason, I implore you to end our marriage and honor your loyal subject. She finished up quickly, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She stared at the king with a determined look in her eyes. You wish to dissolve the marriage? Viserys asked, his face grim. No. Damon never considered me his wife, Lady Rhea said. Viserys clenched his glass, his eyes fixed on Lady Rhea, his breathing becoming more laboured. Damon was indeed a scoundrel, and Viserys hated him for it. But he was also his brother. If Viserys granted Lady Rhea's request, it would bring shame not only to Damon but also to the royal family, making them the subject of ridicule. For the honour of the crown and out of lingering familial loyalty, Viserys hesitated. He didn't want to agree to Lady Rhea's plea for a divorce. The atmosphere grew tense. Rhaenyra looked at Lady Rhea, filled with both indignation and sympathy. She was noble lady, who'd been married for years and was the subject of endless jokes. Leaning close to Rhaegar, she whispered through gritted teeth, Damon is scum. Don't ever become like him. You're wrong to even compare him to me, Rhaegar replied, clearly annoyed. Viserys remained silent for a long time before finally speaking in a deep voice, Lady Rhea, Damon has not yet been apprehended. Can we wait until he is, so that you and he can personally resolve this matter? As an older brother, he was reluctant to make the decision about Damon's fate while he was away. Lady Rhea hesitated, wanting desperately to implore the king to end the marriage immediately. She couldn't bear being Damon's wife for another moment and wanted to be free as soon as possible. Lady Rhea, my father has already approved your request. All you have to do is wait until Damon is captured, Rhaegar interjected, seeing his father's difficulty in making a decision. Lady Rhea looked at the young prince, her eyes filled with suspicion. Rhaegar smiled and said, Runestone has always been a loyal supporter of the royal family. The royal family will not humiliate its followers. Damon has committed grave errors, and this marriage should end. Lady Rhea nodded and asked the king, Your Grace, is what the prince says true? Viserys, looking sorrowful, replied, Yes, Rhaegar speaks for me. When Damon is brought to justice, you may settle the matter as you see fit. Thank you, Your Grace. Rhea was thrilled and turned to Rhaegar. Thank you for your selflessness, Prince. Selflessness? Rhaegar frowned. What did she mean by that? Was she implying he was betraying his own family? Seeing his reaction, Lady Rhea quickly tried to clarify her words. I apologize, that's not what I meant. Rhaegar looked at her, still confused. I'll take my leave now, Your Grace, Lady Rhea said hastily, realizing she was only making things worse. She made her way down the steps, her face flushed with embarrassment. Rhaenyra turned to look at Rhaegar, who met her gaze. I understand why Damon doesn't like her, Rhaegar muttered with frustration. Ahoy, Rhaenyra smiled, averting her gaze. A woman with such sharp tongue was indeed not easy to like. Chapter 114, The Sea Snake and Damon. The banquet continued. Rhaegar took his seat and greeted one noble after another, his smile growing more strained by the minute. Just as his face was starting to hurt from all the smiling, the welcoming drum sounded. Lord Corlys of House Velaeryons, Lord of the Tides, Master of Driftmark, his wife, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, and their children and heirs. The herald's voice echoed through the hall, and the doors swung open. A crowd entered the hall, drawing the attention of everyone present. The noisy banquet hall fell silent as many gazes turned towards the newcomers. The sea snake. Rhaegar murmured softly, equally curious about the man his father had spoken so much about. Seated facing the door, he had a clear view of the group. Leading them was a middle-aged man with silver hair and dark skin, his eyes deep and his demeanor calm. Beside him was a striking woman with black hair streaked with silver, her face proud and regal. The two walked hand in hand. Following behind were a pair of silver-haired young men and women, both dark-skinned and strikingly beautiful. Does Valeria have any black-skinned descendants? Rhaegar thought to himself, intrigued. The group reached the center of the banquet hall, and all eyes were on them. Corlys stepped forward and bowed slightly to Viserys, saying, Your Grace, we're sorry we couldn't make it to the assembly on time. We had to travel a long way. Hee, I didn't see you during the day. I thought the Velaryon house wouldn't come, Viserys responded with a smile, nodding at Rhaenys. Cousin. Cousin, Rhaenys replied with a faint smile. Viserys then turned to Rhaegar and introduced him. Come, Lord Corlys, meet the kingdom's new heir and swear your allegiance. He was eager to see the sea snake's reaction. Corlys' gaze fell on the young prince. He frowned slightly, then said, Your Grace, you have made the right choice. He spoke earnestly. A male heir indeed brought more security than a princess. Corlys knelt on one knee and swore his allegiance plainly, showing no reluctance. Rhaegar rose from his seat and approached Corlys, extending a hand and smiling. Rise, Lord Corlys, I accept your allegiance. Corlys took his hand, rising to his full height, and whispered, Prince, I hope you will be a wise ruler. I will, my lord, Rhaegar replied confidently. Turning to Rhaenys, he said, Aunt, this is the first time we meet, and I welcome you and my cousins. Please, take your seats. It may be our first meeting, but I have long been familiar with you, Rhaenys replied, touching her nephew's head, disregarding the formalities of a ruler and subject. Rhaenyra and Laena stepped forward, greeting warmly, Rhaegar, congratulations on becoming the heir. As Rhaegar exchanged pleasantries with the Velaryon children, Rhaenys approached the main table. She raised a glass of wine, first toasting Viserys. Cousin, she said with a faint smile, to which Viserys responded in kind. Then, she turned to Rhaenyra, her tone dripping with sarcasm, I told you that you would be replaced. You are indeed useless. Her words were filled with bitterness. She had once been a candidate for the throne but had been passed over for Viserys. Seeing Rhaenyra replaced by Rhaegar felt like history repeating itself, but with a male heir instead. Rhaenyra's expression cooled at the comment. She replied blandly, Aunt, Rhaegar is my brother, and I willingly gave up my seat for him. Is this how you lie to yourself? Rhaenys asked, her eyes filled with pity. Rhaenyra clenched her fists and replied calmly, Isn't that how you've managed all these years, knowing the heart of the matter isn't with us? Rhaenys sighed, acknowledging the truth in Rhaenyra's words. You're right. The system itself is flawed, she admitted. Then, changing the subject, she asked, You are not young. Do you need to find a husband to depend on? No need. Rhaegar will not treat me harshly, Rhaenyra replied firmly. Rhaenys seemed a bit down, but she agreed, That's fine. You can follow the family tradition. Despite her harsh words, Rhaenys felt a kinship with her niece, both having suffered under the same system. She admired Rhaenyra's strength, even if she didn't show it openly. Rhaegar found himself enjoying a good conversation with Rhaenyra, who seemed to take a liking to him. At that moment, a new figure entered through the still open doors. The man had short silver hair, wore black leather armor, and bore a cynical smile. The banquet continued with its usual pomp and circumstance until a sudden commotion interrupted the revelry. Bang! Viserys' face twisted with anger as he slammed the table, shouting, Damon, you bastard, how dare you show up in front of me? Rhaegar was startled by his father's outburst and turned to see who had entered. His expression hardened when he recognized the visitor. Damon Targaryen, the very man who was on the wanted list. Damon was standing at the door, eating a piece of bread with salt. As he strolled in, the room fell silent. Swish, swish. Two guards unsheathed their swords and positioned them at Damon's neck, their expressions grim. Damon swallowed the last bite of bread, raised his hands in a mock gesture of surrender, and smiled faintly. Brother, I am here enjoying the rights of a guest. You are a criminal and deserve no such rights, Viserys retorted angrily. Arrest him and throw him in the dungeon. The sword blades pressed against Damon's skin, and he winced slightly. Still, he managed to say, For tonight, at least, I'm here as a guest. With that, he unsheathed the Dark Sister, his Velaeryons steel sword, and offered it with both hands. Viserys sneered at the gesture. You fool! You have no honor in my eyes. The hall was filled with tension, and many of the guests had stopped eating, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Viserys' fury was palpable. This was the man who had almost killed his son. Your Grace, Damon has eaten your bread and wine. It's against the gods' laws to harm a guest under your roof, Corlys Velaryon interjected. Viserys shot Corlys a look that said it all. Lord Corlys, did he come here with your family? Damon's timing was suspicious, coming so close on the heels of the Velaeryons. Viserys was already suspicious of Damon and Corlys' relationship. Corlys met the king's gaze evenly. I don't know what crime Prince Damon has committed, but he's your blood. A kinslayer is cursed by the gods. The kinslayer is him. Viserys shouted, his agitation mounting. Damon spoke up, brother, all our kin are alive and well. I have killed no one. Shut your mouth, or I'll rip out your tongue, Viserys snapped, his eyes blazing. Damon fell silent, lowering his head. The tension was palpable, and the festive atmosphere had turned icy. Guests looked around uncomfortably, their earlier smiles now frozen. Seeing the need to defuse the situation, Lionel Strong rose and approached the king, speaking in a low voice, Your Grace, Damon has walked into your grasp. There will be ample time to execute him later. Are you suggesting I let this murderer attend the banquet? Viserys replied, his tone indicating disgust. Today is the heir-changing ceremony, and nobles from all over the continent are gathered here. It is not fitting to spill blood on such an occasion, Lionel advised, considering the consequences of a public execution. Chapter 115, Black and Green. Viserys' face fell upon hearing the news of Damon's imprisonment. While it was a relief to have him detained, the scandal of the royal family's infighting was now at risk of becoming public knowledge. Rhaenyra, eager to prevent rumors of internal conflict, had expressed her support for Rhaegar's claim. The tranquility of the day could not be shattered by Damon's antics. Rhaegar approached his father and tugged at his sleeve. Viserys looked down at his son, confusion etched on his face. Father, Rhaegar whispered, the rights of guests cannot be violated. Confiscate his sword and detain him immediately after the banquet. No matter what Damon and the Sea Snake might be up to, Damon's presence in King's Landing made it tough to get away. There was no need to let their anger get the better of them. Viserys looked at his son for a long moment before turning to Lionel for advice. Lionel nodded. The prince is right. Damon can't escape. Taking a deep breath, Viserys snorted. Very well, let him have one more comfortable night. He then ordered, confiscate his sword and let him in. Yes, Your Grace, the guards responded. They took the Dark Sister, Damon's Velaeryons steel sword, and thoroughly searched him for any hidden weapons. Damon cooperated, smiling as he said, Brother, I am here only to send my blessings for my great-nephew's celebration. Thank you, Uncle, Rhaegar replied coldly, signaling the guards to take the sword. Find a corner to sit in and grab some wine before the feast ends, Viserys ordered with contempt. Damon spread his arms helplessly. I am your brother. You're not worthy, Viserys shot back, not even looking at him. Damon looked around the room for a place to sit, but was interrupted by a loud thump. Lady Rhea rose from her seat, glaring at Damon with fury. Rhea, sit down, Jane whispered, trying to prevent her from making a scene. Humph. Rhea obeyed reluctantly, shooting Damon a look of pure disgust before sitting down. Damon smirked. Isn't this my lady? Concerned about your husband? Vile. Rhea spat, cursing him. Damon laughed coldly and found an empty seat. He wasn't supposed to be here, but he couldn't resist the urge to meet his nephew, the new heir. As Damon settled, Viserys tried to restore the festive atmosphere. All of you. Bang. The door opened again. Alicent, dressed in a striking green gown, walked into the hall, holding Aegon in one hand and Helena in the other. Her calm, assured demeanor drew everyone's attention. The room fell silent. Green was a significant color, particularly for House Hightower. When Old Town called its bannermen to war, the lighthouse on the high tower would light up green. Viserys understood the implication of the color and looked puzzled. Rhaegar, keeping his gaze on Alicent, commented, Your Grace, your dress is beautiful. Alicent smiled gently. I chose it carefully. It's the only one that suits tonight's mood. I'm glad you dressed up for my celebration, but I don't like the color of your dress, Rhaegar said, glancing at the high tower table. Change it. There is still time. Otto looked puzzled, not expecting his usually soft-hearted daughter to make such a bold statement. Hobart, on the other hand, seemed pleased, waving to Aegon beside Alicent. Viserys spoke in a low voice, Alicent, I left my handkerchief in my room. Fetch it for me. He did not wish to see his queen in a green dress, it felt like a slight against him. Alicent approached the main seat, let go of her children's hands, and wiped Viserys' mouth with a handkerchief. I like this dress and won't change it. Viserys grabbed her wrist. You must. Unless you want me to remove it right now, I must decline, Alicent replied firmly, her eyes steely. She knew precisely what her family wanted and was exhausted from their manipulations. She had endured enough, the sleepless nights and constant strain had worn her down. She was tired of merely surviving in the shadows. Now, it was time to stand up for herself, live openly and boldly, and fight for her children's future. Viserys, realizing her determination, let go of her hand. His mood, already soured by Damon's appearance, worsened. Alicent ignored her husband's displeasure and took her seat beside him without acknowledging Rhaegar. Rhaegar scanned the room, his expression unreadable. Rhaegar, get some rest, Rhaenyra suggested, trying to comfort him. Rhaegar shook his head, a wry smile on his lips. Someone's in a hurry, he muttered. He wasn't happy, but he had been prepared for this. Rhaenyra's time as heir had sown discord, and now as the heir, he had to deal with the fallout. When he became crown prince, the law prevailed. And the demons lurking in the shadows will be unable to bear it, they will reveal their fangs. This is good. It's crucial to know who the enemy is. The feast continued, but there was a bit of an awkward atmosphere. Viserys tried to lighten the mood with a speech, and then the music started and people started dancing. Rhaegar stayed seated, not in the mood for festivities. The king's guard was carrying the Dark Sister away, but Rhaegar intervened, requesting to let him see it. Viserys didn't refuse this time. He had contemplated gifting the ancestral sword to his eldest son. Damon isn't worthy of it. The king's guard brought the Dark Sister to him, and he examined it closely. The system beeped. Quest initiated, explore the Velaeryons steel sword, Dark Sister. Rhaegar smiled slightly, his mood improving. He placed the Dark Sister on the table, his hand resting on the hilt. Dark Sisters. Exploration progress, 0.5%. The music played, and the earlier tension dissipated as people found dance partners. However, Rhaenyra declined several invitations, citing feeling unwell as her reason. Among them stand Jason and Tyland, the twin brothers of House Lannister, alongside Lionel's eldest son, Harwin Strong, among many others. Eventually, frustrated and annoyed, she left the party early. Rhaegar watched her leave before turning his attention back to the hall. He observed Damon dancing with Rhaenys's daughter, Laena, showing affection, and Alicent laughing with her family. Everything seemed normal, but Rhaegar could sense the undercurrents of tension and rivalry. The banquet continued, but the night's events had revealed much about who stood with him and who stood against him. Chapter 116, Undercurrents. As midnight approached, the ball showed no signs of winding down, with nobles still enjoying the social festivities. Rhaegar, feeling the weight of the long night, rested his head on his hand, battling fatigue. Footsteps echoed, and suddenly Damon appeared, catching Rhaegar's suspicious gaze. With hands raised in mock surrender, Damon chuckled, "Great nephew, I haven't yet offered my congratulations on your ascension to heir." Rhaegar's brow furrowed. "Why are you here?" "I felt like it." "Do I need more reason?" Damon replied nonchalantly. "As you wish, you and your Dark Sisters are welcome," Rhaegar remarked, casting a glance at the precious sword. Damon playfully asked, "Can you even lift it with your height?" Rhaegar remained calm, unsure how to respond to such audacity. Could anyone be so bold? After a moment's thought, Rhaegar raised his glass. "Uncle, I appreciate your boldness and the help you've given my father. Here, to you." In his mind, Damon was already a trapped animal. No need for harsh words. Damon eyed the juice in the glass and shook his head. "Children's drinks. I prefer fine wine." Rhaegar smiled. "As heir, when I extend a courtesy, you must oblige. What if I decline?" Damon smirked. "Let's find out then." Rhaegar replied by tipping his glass, which spilled the juice onto the floor. Damon looked perplexed, so Rhaegar brought the glass down firmly onto the table. There was a thump as Eric drew his long sword and held it to Damon's neck. Damon looked Eric in the eye and gave him a disdainful look. "Are you planning to kill me?" "I will if necessary," Eric stated firmly. Rhaegar poured another glass of juice and offered it to Damon. "Here, uncle. Have a drink." Damon lifted his hand, overturning the glass once more, the juice spilling out. "Why oh you are a naive little prince? Do you think I'll yield to you?" Bang! The cup crashed onto the tabletop once more, and Rhaegar's countenance turned icy. Swish swish! 2 more blades emerged from their scabbards, one poised at Damon's neck and the other at his lower back. Damon glanced back, finding Cole and Harold, who had silently approached, their expressions unreadable. Both were Kingsguard, privy to Damon's transgressions. How could they allow a sinner to approach the prince with such impunity? "Uncle, I'm raising my glass to you because you've been so supportive of my father," Rhaegar said, raising his glass again and tilting his head. "I understand your thoughts. My father was merciful, but I am not. I will be the judge, ensuring you never don the black cloak and journey to the wall." Rhaegar knew his father's tendencies well, even amidst all the animosity. When push came to shove, Viserys would inevitably hesitate. Damon's expression shifted slightly. "You plan to send me to the wall as a brother of the Night's Watch?" Rhaegar replied, "Drink this, and you may live past tonight." He gave his uncle another chance. Kinslaying was a pretty serious accusation, and he was reluctant to see his father lose a blood relative. "I never thought that you'd despise me so much. Go to the wall and try to make amends." There was a brief silence, broken by Damon's grin. He was impressed by his nephew's generosity, even in trying to spare his life. Damon accepted the glass, sniffing the fragrant juice before bringing it close to his lips. Viserys silently applauded the move, his eyes darting between the two. Damon took a tentative sip before spilling the juice onto the ground with a sigh. "Unfortunately, this isn't to my liking." Bang! A wine glass struck Damon's forehead, causing him to stagger. Viserys trembled with anger, his teeth grinding. "Get lost and savor the end of your miserable life, you heartless beast." "Fine, have it your way," Damon retorted, covering his bleeding forehead as he pushed past the blocking Cole and merged into the dancing throng. Observing his nephew's temperament, Damon felt the night had not been in vain. As a prominent figure in the family, his actions caught the attention of many well-meaning individuals. At the Velaryon lineage table, Rhaenys gripped her cutlery tightly, her tone laced with venom. "You court your own demise, so don't blame others for it." "Damon is his own man," Jane reassured softly, her eyes flickering with amusement as she glanced at Rhaegar. "The heir seems to be a bit more astute than Rhaenyra. He's the son of the late Queen Aemma Oren and is a natural ally for you and the Vale," Eobert analyzed. "You're right, but I'm more intrigued by his marriage," Jane mused, her fingers lightly tracing her chin. Eobert hesitated. "The prince is only 6 years old, and according to Targaryen family tradition, he has a pair of sisters to choose from." "Who knows?" Jane chuckled. At the head table, Viserys was breathing heavily and looked flushed with anger. He couldn't understand why his eldest son had denied Damon a chance at life when he himself was willing to grant it. Must he, his own brother, be the one to sever his head? "I'll grant you your wish, you bastard," Viserys seethed, suppressing his rage. Rhaegar told Cole and Harold to stand down and guard the entrance. On closer inspection, he could see that his hands were trembling slightly, and that he was breathing heavily. But it wasn't fear or anger, it was a rush of excitement. "Uncle, an eye for an eye," Rhaegar said. Meanwhile, back in the dragon pit, the roars of the dragons could be heard echoing around the circular chamber. There were several massive dragons in there, including Vaer, Malaise, Sea Smoke, and Syrox. Bound by iron chains, Damon's blood Wyrm let out a roar of rage, its gaze sweeping the dark corners of the crypt. Far away, a black dragon scaled the dragon pit's wall, its movements betraying its master's emotions. In the banquet hall, Rhaegar hoisted his heavy dark sister, bidding his father farewell with a smile. "I'll be on my way now, father." "Go on, the feast will continue for some time," Viserys replied, his response mild. Rhaegar nodded, halting Eric from following as he whispered a word in his ear. Eric's brows furrowed, and he nodded solemnly. "Goodbye," Rhaegar bid him farewell before departing. The festivities carried on, with Tully, Tyrell, and other nobles expressing their regrets upon learning of the prince's departure. Meanwhile, Damon, rejected by one partner after another, roamed aimlessly through the crowd. "No dance partner?" a soft voice called from behind, as Laena approached with a smile. Chapter 117, Dragon Attack on a Rainy Night. Damon's gaze roved over Laena's form, appreciating her curves, exotic complexion, and seductive red lips, all of which aligned perfectly with his tastes. He extended his hand with a smile and said, "It looks like your dance partner left you hanging." "It does," Laena replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "But I have more pressing matters to attend to, so I guess I'll have to lower my standards and dance with you." Damon's eyes lit up with desire as they began their dance. With a bold move, Rhaenyra leaned in, her ample bosom pressing against him as she spoke softly, "Have you thought about how you're going to leave?" She inherited her mother Rhaenys's analytical nature and couldn't understand Damon's arrogance without a plan. "I can't divulge all my secrets, my dear," Damon chuckled, his hand trailing down her waist, growing bolder. "A piece of advice, the dragon pit is now under the control of the new heir. You'd better get out of here," Rhaenyra said in a low voice. Damon's expression didn't change as his hand kept exploring, and his words were still ambiguous. "Then I'll have to be quick about it." A quick glance revealed the guarded main gate, leaving him no easy means of escape without a weapon. Other passages were similarly patrolled, and he knew he was under close scrutiny from the moment he set foot in King's Landing. As the ball went on, Damon and Rhaenyra danced together, seeming relaxed despite the situation. Corlys felt a twinge of unease as he observed his daughter with Damon. Such interactions weren't good for the Velaeryons house. Rhaenys suggested, "Should we call Rhaenyra back?" Corlys shook his head. "We arrived here with Damon, we can't deny our association." "Damon won't find it easy to slip away," Rhaenys predicted, anticipating his imminent arrest. "No rush. I'm curious to see if our king has the ruthlessness to handle Damon," Corlys mused with interest. "Humph. They're all my kin, I have no interest in such drama," Rhaenys retorted coldly, rising from the table. Opting to return to Driftmark for the greater good, she had no desire to compete for the Iron Throne or witness further familial discord. Internally, Rhaenys couldn't help but silently chastise her two cousins for their foolishness. As midnight drew near and the early morning hours approached, the ball reached its peak, with the music reaching a crescendo that would stir the deepest emotions of the attendees. Scream! A sudden cry pierced the air. "Fire! There's a fire outside!" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall as flames flickered against the stained glass windows, casting an eerie glow inside. Fire had erupted within the Red Keep, starting inconspicuously in an attic before rapidly spreading, engulfing nearby gambling dens and brothels. Viserys and his tired entourage were trying to keep things calm as they tried to put out the fire. Lionel swiftly organized men to combat the fire, including his eldest son, Harwin. "Your Grace, perhaps it's best if you depart," Lionel urged, concerned for the king's well-being. Viserys declined. "No, the fire hasn't reached the banquet hall yet. I must reassure our guests." Suddenly, candles flickered and went out one by one, plunging the hall into darkness except for a few remaining bonfire pots. "Protect the king!" Harold, captain of the King's Guard, sprang into action, quickly positioning himself between the king and any potential threats, followed closely by Cole. Amidst the chaos, panicked cries rang out, echoing off the walls as noble women recoiled in fear. Rhaenyra, in the dimness, grasped at Damon's belt, her expression serious. "Where do you think you're going?" Damon tightened his grip on her chin as he replied coldly, "You said I should make a quick exit. Well, here's my chance. Do you really think you can escape?" Rhaenyra's words carried weight. "I have to try. I'd rather lose my head or spend my days on the wall, devoid of all pleasure," Damon replied, slipping away into the confusion towards a secluded corner of the hall. Watching him depart, Rhaenyra shook her head in disappointment. A self-important man indeed. As the fire raged on, Red Keep soldiers and gold cloak guards from King's Landing worked hard to put it out. Meanwhile, Damon skillfully evaded the patrolling guards and made his way to a hidden passage within the Red Keep. When he got there, he found a guy in black robes waiting for him. It was like they'd made a deal. "Once this is done, our agreement will be fulfilled," the figure said, tossing Damon a matching black robe. Damon's reply was brief. "I think it would be a good idea if you came with me." The figure shook their head firmly. "No, I have another commitment I need to keep." Without further ado, Damon donned the black robe and disappeared into the secret passage, while the black-robed figure slipped away into the night. As Damon emerged from the Red Keep, he was met with a sudden downpour. The rain intensified as if spurred on by the earlier fire. He kept going, undeterred by the weather, navigating the narrow alleys and letting the rain cascade around him. Arriving at the dragon pit. Ka-ching! A dragon keeper's neck snapped suddenly from behind, his body collapsing lifelessly. Another dragon keeper, startled, reached for his sword, but before he could react, a swift kick landed in his abdomen, sending him crashing to the ground. With determination, Damon advanced, swiftly crushing the fallen man's throat underfoot. A swift and silent dispatched the two dragon keepers and cleared his path. With Caraxes, his dragon, awaiting him. Damon swiftly freed the beast from its chains and mounted its back. As they soared into the stormy sky, a lone figure emerged from the shadows, their presence unnoticed. Caraxes soared swiftly, leaving the skies over King's Landing behind and entering the expanse of Blackwater Bay. It was raining hard, with each drop splashing loudly on the ground. Damon felt a rush of relief at escaping King's Landing. He knew he'd made the right call. Had he waited to depart early in the morning, he wouldn't have dared to face his brother. Roar! Caraxes suddenly roared, his body twisting uneasily. "What's wrong, Caraxes?" Damon inquired, sensing his dragon's agitation. Caraxes's pupils dilated alertly as he quickened his flight. Rumble! A thunderstorm erupted, lightning illuminating the night sky. Damon looked up, spotting a massive shadow followed by Caraxes weaving among the clouds. "Uncle, I've found you!" Rhaegar's voice boomed as the shadow descended. Roar! Another roar, distinct from Caraxes, widened Damon's eyes in alarm. Cannibal dove down, its green dragon fire igniting fiercely as it collided with Caraxes's neck. "No!" Damon yelled, gripping the reins tightly. Before he could command a response, Cannibal's flames engulfed Caraxes's head and eyes. Even in the rainy night, Cannibal's dragon fire raged fiercely. "Cannibal, tear them apart!" Rhaegar's eyes glinted with madness as he watched the chaos unfold. Damon realized that his nephew was planning to kill him. He'd gone back to King's Landing to provoke him. Yet, he'd been expecting Damon to run and had been waiting for him. Roar! As Cannibal's flames died down, it grabbed Caraxes, its claws digging into his spine as it lunged for his wing with a savage bite. Caraxes wailed in agony, twisting frantically in a futile attempt to break free from Cannibal's grasp. However, despite its efforts, Caraxes couldn't escape, and its slender body was ensnared by Cannibal's relentless hold. Stab! Cannibal, having long hungered for the taste of its own kind, struck with ferocity, shattering Caraxes's shoulder blade with a single bite. Poor Caraxes never stood a chance to retaliate, its body was torn asunder. Dracarys! Rhaegar's command echoed once more. Cannibal savagely ripped apart flesh and blood, swallowing it greedily before unleashing another torrent of green dragon fire. Roar! Caraxes roared in agony as the dragon fire seared his already wounded flesh, causing him to plummet uncontrollably. "Caraxes, hold on!" Damon's voice rang out desperately as he watched his dragon being destroyed before his eyes, a chill gripping his soul as he struggled to maintain his composure. Rhaegar didn't show any mercy. Cannibal's flames kept raining down on Caraxes, trying to send him plummeting into the sea. In the pouring rain and thunderous skies, Caraxes was no match for Cannibal's pursuit. With a splash, it went into the ocean. Damon had no time to undo the chain around his waist, he was dragged into the depths alongside his dragon. The sea was in a state of turmoil, with Caraxes's blood staining the waters crimson and mixing with the cold waves. Rhaegar was shaking, holding Cannibal aloft, his once regal attire now soaked by the rain. As lightning illuminated the night, Rhaegar's expression twisted in agitation, his chest heaving. Wiping away the rain, Rhaegar's features contorted into a cold glare. "Uncle, you left me no choice." Rhaegar's voice echoed with a hint of madness. "I owed you a mouthful of dragon fire and today I paid it back. My father may have spared you, but I won't. I've come to end you." The tempest intensified, mirroring Rhaegar's turbulent emotions. Whew! A gust of wind swept past, tossing Rhaegar's hair in disarray. Cannibal roared, slowing its pace. Rhaegar gazed up at the dark, cloudy sky, his expression conflicted, as if wrestling with a decision. After a moment's hesitation, he gritted his teeth and issued a command, "Cannibal, let's go." Roar! Cannibal obeyed eagerly, its wings beating with renewed vigor. Looking back, the sea had vanished into a blur in the distance. A bolt of lightning pierced the clouds, illuminating the other half of Rhaegar's face, revealing uncertainty and inner turmoil. "You spared me on Dragonstone Island, so I'll grant you a chance to live," he murmured. "With such a vast ocean, pray that Caraxes lives up to its name." Chapter 118, Excellence in Swordsmanship. 118 AC, early summer, morning. Above the city of King's Landing, a pitch-black dragon soared gracefully, its enormous shadow casting a vast expanse of darkness over the city below. Roar! The dragon's roar reverberated across the sky, causing many people to stop and look up in awe. When they saw the dragon, they showed respect and quickly left. After 7 years, the people of King's Landing had gotten used to seeing the black dragon. It belonged to Rhaegar Targaryen, the king's eldest son and heir to the Iron Throne, who was known affectionately as the Good Prince. Singers and troubadours had given him this title because they thought he was kind and did a lot of good, especially for the city's orphanage. The black dragon flew around King's Landing before landing slowly on the hill where the dragon pit was located. "Welcome back, Prince." The dragon keepers, who had been awaiting his return, rushed forward as the massive dragon touched down. Sitting atop Cannibal, a fierce dragon, was a handsome young man with silver hair, purple eyes, and a pale complexion. His expression remained indifferent as he dismounted. "Where's Eric? Tell him to get the guards ready for the Mushroom Set's caravan," Rhaegar said firmly. Maynard Waters, garbed in a scholar's robe, approached respectfully. "Prince, the king's guard have been summoned back to the Red Keep." Rhaegar nodded, a smile touching his lips. "Then send someone to make the necessary preparations. The caravan will arrive before afternoon." "Yes, Prince," Maynard responded promptly. Once he'd given his orders, Rhaegar climbed down the ladder and patted Cannibal's snout gently. "Who?" Cannibal snorted, his green pupils full of reluctance. Rhaegar said, "Just stay in the dragon pit and you can roam freely at night." "Roar!" Cannibal shook his head, then lumbered towards the dragon pit. The dragon keepers quickly stepped aside, wary of the swaying dragon's tail. Seeing this, Rhaegar smiled faintly. "Let's go. After a few days away, it's time to return to the Red Keep." "Yes, Prince," responded the dragon keepers in unison, forming two lines to escort the prince to his carriage, flanking it as it moved. After years of diligent work, the dragon pit had been thoroughly refurbished and now lay firmly under Rhaegar's control. In King's Landing, the dragon pit was undeniably his domain. The Red Keep, martial arts arena. Rhaegar had changed out of his dragon-riding attire. He now stood bare-chested, wearing a skirt-like garment around his waist and holding an elegant sword. The attire was inspired by fragmented images from his dreams. These dreams were often disjointed, but occasionally offered practical insights that Rhaegar experimented with during his leisure time. The sword in his hand was the Dark Sister, one of the Targaryen family's ancestral blades. This Velaeryon steel longsword had been a gift from his dear uncle Damon on the night of the heir exchange. Rhaegar often missed his uncle, who always brought him something remarkable whenever they met. Clang! The sound of iron striking iron echoed as Rhaegar wielded the Dark Sister, clashing with his opponent. "Prince, your swordplay is swift, but it lacks finesse," observed Syrio, the water dancer. Syrio was a short man with curly brown hair. He smiled calmly and moved with a light step. His sword, held like a snake in his hand, was poised to strike. Syrio had been teaching Rhaegar how to use a sword since he was 8 years old, and they often sparred. Today, Rhaegar wanted to test how much he had progressed. He lunged forward, the Dark Sister flashing darkly as it slashed towards Syrio. Syrio responded with ease, blocking and retreating, maintaining his stance with one hand holding the sword and the other behind his back. "Syrio, a one-handed sword can't block a heavy chop." Rhaegar's voice was clear and confident. He kicked Syrio in the stomach, then brought his sword down in a two-handed strike. At only 13 years old, Rhaegar already stood tall at 175 centimeters. His upright posture and long limbs allowed him to momentarily overpower Syrio during their sparring sessions. Syrio quickly regained his footing and swung his sword upwards, countering Rhaegar's attack with practiced precision. Clang! With a sharp crack, Syrio's one-handed sword broke, and the Dark Sister hovered above his head. "You win, Prince," Syrio said, swallowing hard as he looked up at the cold steel. "Your swordsmanship is the best in the continent." "I only had the advantage because my weapon is superior," Rhaegar said, sheathing the Dark Sister. He nodded towards Eric, who was watching from a distance, and then beckoned him over. "Prince, catch!" Eric threw a steel lance, which Rhaegar caught with ease. "Let's do this again, Syrio," Rhaegar said, taking the lance in both hands. He moved with great agility, spinning the lance with fluid grace. Rhaegar was not only a great swordsman, he was also a skilled lancer. He'd spent years honing his sword skills, while his lance skills were developed through exploring ancient relics. By calling the system, he can see the new information. Rhaegar Targaryen. Talent, Dreamer, Gold, Longevity, Green. Bloodline, Ancient Valyrian Dragon Lord, 39%. Skills, Sword Mastery, Spear Mastery, Old Valyrian Language Proficiency. Relic, Blood and Fire, True Dragon's Blood, Knight's Oath. Evaluation, excellent scion of an ancient bloodline, expect that gold coin of yours to always be on the greatness side. Rhaegar's mouth curled into a smile as he reviewed the system panel. His spearmanship came from an exploration from an ancient broken lance, granting him exceptional skill at a young age. Facing the prince's lance, Syrio smiled helplessly and retrieved another one-handed sword from the weapon rack. This time, their combat was even fiercer. Rhaegar's spear moved like a raging storm, constantly striking and thrusting. Syrio's movements were fluid, his one-handed sword blocking and intercepting while his body danced left and right with agility. As the fierce exchange continued, Rhaegar's breathing grew heavier, his face flushed with excitement. He relished the sensation of his blood boiling. It was more invigorating than a hot spring. With a final, powerful strike, the spearhead spun and thrust straight towards Syrio's forehead. Dang! The tip of the spear swept past Syrio's eyes, aiming for his brow, but was blocked by the spine of his sword. Syrio's eyes were intense as he held his sword firmly to stop the spear. Slap! Good move, Rhaegar. A clear voice accompanied by applause echoed from the second-floor observation deck. Rhaegar looked over to see Rhaenyra, dressed in a black dress, smiling and clapping enthusiastically. Rhaenyra, you're back from Dragonstone Island. Rhaegar took his spear and looked at her with surprise. Rhaenyra was beaming as she turned and walked to the staircase entrance, then ran down the stairs. I got back yesterday, and you were the only one who didn't know. Rhaegar was overjoyed to see his sister after such a long time and quickly walked towards the staircase corner. As Syrio passed by, Rhaegar swung his spear, hitting Syrio in the leg and sending him sprawling. Before Syrio could even moan in pain, Eric stepped forward, shackles in hand, and quickly cuffed Syrio's hands and feet. Time to wrap it up, swordsman, Eric said. He grabbed Syrio by the arm and caught the lance Rhaegar threw to him with the other hand. Syrio was more than just Rhaegar's fencing teacher. He was also a regular visitor to the dungeons of the Red Keep. Chapter 119, Small Council Meeting. Rhaegar didn't even look back, he'd gotten used to it. Syrio made a mistake and decided to face the consequences instead of running away. Rhaegar respected his swordsman teacher's decision. Rhaenyra quickly reached the corner of the stairs, jogging down to meet him. The two siblings embraced tightly. At 21, Rhaenyra had blossomed into a beautiful woman, her slim figure accentuated by a black skirt, her long silver hair framing her face. Rhaegar, now more imposing and confident, grabbed her by the waist, looked her over, and asked, "Did the trip go well?" Rhaenyra, slightly shorter than her brother, leaned into his arms and lifted her chin proudly. Syrinx laid 3 dragon eggs, 3 whole eggs. She held up 3 fingers, beaming with pride. Syrinx lives up to her name. The future of our family depends on such a productive dragon, Rhaegar praised her with a smile. Suddenly, Rhaenyra's smile faded a bit. Are your dreams still troubling you? She asked, her gaze full of concern. She gently stroked his pale complexion, noting the dark circles under his eyes. It's okay, just one dream every few days. I've gotten used to it, Rhaegar reassured her, shaking his head. Over the years, his dreamer talent had been kicking in, bringing vivid images of dragon fights, flames, and battles into his dreams. There were even glimpses of another world, mostly useless except for some historical facts about dynastic changes. Rhaenyra, full of pity, wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered in his ear, I haven't seen you for a month. Did you miss me? Of course, all the time, Rhaegar replied, a smile breaking across his pale cheeks. That's a good boy. Here's a reward for you. Rhaenyra cupped his cheek and placed a light kiss on it. Rhaegar coughed softly, breaking away from the embrace and changing the subject. I need to take a shower first. Let the kitchen prepare a reception for you. No problem, Rhaenyra agreed with a smile. Rhaenyra's bedroom smelled great. It was filled with the aroma of a sumptuous meal. The round table was loaded with fried and sautéed dishes, along with a variety of desserts. Rhaenyra, not worried about her image, took a big bite of the food and enjoyed every bite. Rhaegar, having eaten a few simple bites, sat back to watch. The dishes were based on common ingredients but were delicious and easy to prepare. He had arranged for a small kitchen and trusted staff to prepare his meals. Ostensibly, this was to develop new recipes, but in reality, it was a precaution against poisoning 2 birds with 1 stone. Knock knock. Halfway through the meal, there was a knock on the door and Eric's voice came through. Prince, the king has convened a small council meeting and invited you to attend. Rhaegar's eyes flashed slightly. Got it, I'll be there in a moment. Father is calling you, you'd better go quickly, Rhaenyra suggested, swallowing a mouthful of cake, her cheeks puffing out. There's no rush. We'll go together once you're done eating, Rhaegar said nonchalantly, leaning back in his chair. What am I going to do? I'm not an advisor, Rhaenyra said hesitantly. As the Princess of Dragonstone, she was technically qualified to attend the small council meeting, but her status as the former crown princess made it somewhat awkward. It doesn't matter. There's a good show to be seen today, Rhaegar said, a smile spreading across his face as he thought of the issues discussed at the last small council meeting. Half an hour later, Rhaegar escorted Rhaenyra to the council hall. As they approached the solemn gates, Rhaegar glanced at her nostalgically. Rhaenyra, do you remember the first time I came here? You were just a little kid then, clinging to me and calling me sister, Rhaenyra replied, resting her hands in front of her belly and smiling at the memory. That's right. Last time, you led me through the door. This time, it's my turn, Rhaegar said, placing his hand on the gate and giving it a firm push. Creak. The door opened wide, revealing the scene inside. Viserys sat at the head of a round table, flanked by the other advisors of the realm. Rhaegar stepped through the door, looking around before opening his arms. My lords, forgive me for being late. Viserys rose slowly, his eyes on his eldest son. Rhaegar, it is not a good habit to be late, he said with mock sternness. Of course, but I have an excuse, Rhaegar replied, stepping aside to reveal Rhaenyra behind him. Rhaenyra, will you be attending the small council meeting as well? Viserys asked, a smile spreading across his face at the sight of his daughter. Viserys knew that Rhaenyra had returned to King's Landing from Dragonstone yesterday, but she had not come to see him. He was not angry about this. Rhaenyra had deliberately distanced herself from him since the heir exchange, but he believed it was worth it. Rhaegar had grown into a better heir, bringing him hope and making him feel much better in recent years. Oh, I didn't plan on it, Rhaenyra shrugged, walking calmly inside. She'd grown up in this place and it felt like home to her. Father, what's the big topic today? Rhaegar asked, more relaxed than Rhaenyra, as he strode in and swept his gaze over the small council. Present were, Lyonel Strong, Hand of the King, Tyland Lannister, Master of Ships, Maester Melos, Grand Maester, Lyman Beesbury, Master of Coin, Jasper Wilde, Master of Laws. Beside Viserys stood Sir Criston Cole, the new Lord Commander of the King's Guard, appointed in 112 AC after the death of Sir Harold Westerling. The advisors all stood up to show their respect as Rhaegar approached the conference table. Sit down, no need to be polite, he nodded gently. Rhaegar noticed only one empty chair at the table and turned to Sir Criston Cole. Sir, please fetch a chair. Cole glanced at the king, hesitating. The Master of Laws, Jasper Wilde, frowned and spoke up, Prince, the princess is not a member of the small council and should be excused. I am not a member of the small council either, should I recuse myself as well? Rhaegar replied, pulling back the chair in front of him and tilting his head towards Jasper. Jasper blanched and said, You are the heir, and it is in accordance with etiquette for you to participate in political affairs. Very well. Rhaenyra was also once heir and is the Princess of Dragonstone. She is eligible to participate in the council, Rhaegar said firmly. He was the heir, and what he said was the rule. He then pulled Rhaenyra's hand and pressed her into the empty chair. Looking back at Cole, he said coldly, Sir, do I have to say it a second time? Cole remained silent and looked to the king. Viserys, somewhat helpless, said, Go on, move a chair for the princess. Rhaenyra was the Princess of Dragonstone, holding one of the most important lands of the Targaryen family. Her participation in the council indicated a desire to mend her relationship with her father, which was beneficial for both the family and the realm. When the chair was brought in, Rhaenyra sat down beside Rhaegar and reached for the platter in the center of the table. Inside the plate was a black stone ball with a green dragon pattern. Chapter 120, Dragon Pit Reform. Tink. The stone ball landed in the slot in front of Rhaegar, signifying that the heir prince was ready and the small council meeting had officially begun. Tyland Lannister was the first to speak, his expression serious. Your Grace, there are signs that the Kingdom of the Three Daughters is resurging after many years. According to the latest reports, ships near the Stepstones have been intercepted by an unknown group of pirates. Viserys' face grew heavy. Are you sure it's the 3 daughters? Not confirmed yet, but the signs point to them, Tyland replied, shaking his head. The 3 daughters pirates are a serious threat to the kingdom. We must send more spies to gather accurate information and should not underestimate them, Viserys sighed. He didn't want the kingdom involved in a war, especially with the stepstones so far from King's Landing. Tyland nodded, concluding his report. Next was Lionel Strong, Hand of the King. Placing one hand on the table, the bloated hand spoke slowly, Your Grace, the construction of the prince's palace has begun, and the cost is considerable. That's fine. We'll cover it from the treasury, Viserys said, smiling at Rhaegar. That's good news for you. Thank you, Father, Rhaegar replied, leaning back in his chair with a smile. Traditionally, the fiefdoms of crown princes were on Dragonstone. To compensate Rhaenyra, the island was returned to her until her death, leaving Rhaegar without his own fiefdom. After years of negotiations, it was decided that both the heir prince and the princess should have their own residences. Viserys had given Rhaegar a piece of land of his choosing to build the prince's palace. Work had begun early this year, but due to its distance from King's Landing and the time required to select materials and labor, construction had only recently started. Lionel finished his report. The Minister of Finance, Lyman Beesbury, rose slowly to his feet, holding a report in his hand. Your Grace, the prince has submitted a proposal for the reconstruction of the dragon pit. The costs are so high that I cannot authorize it. Oh, let me see, Viserys said, puzzled. Criston Cole passed the report to him. Viserys flipped through a few pages, his face darkening with each page he read. He gritted his teeth and said, Rhaegar, the dragon pit is a significant structure for the royal family. It cost a fortune to build, and now you want to demolish and rebuild it. Rhaegar remained calm and replied, Father, you yourself said the dragon pit is extremely important. The current dragon pit is merely a place of confinement, not a suitable nest for dragons. Dismantling and rebuilding a more appropriate nest will benefit our dragon breeding efforts. Rhaenyra raised her hand in support. I agree. I disagree. Viserys interjected sharply. Grimacing, he continued, look at your proposal. To build a tower like Dragon Pit, we'd need all the stone in the kingdom and immense resources. He knew the Dragon Pit was important, but he believed that power was the key to ruling the kingdom. Rebuilding would be so expensive that even emptying the treasury might not be enough. Lyman Beesbury spoke up, Your Grace, the construction of the prince's palace has already strained our finances. Rebuilding the dragon pit could bankrupt us. As the master of coin and lord treasurer, every gold coin in the treasury was his lifeblood. The idea of spending such a large sum distressed him deeply. Tyland raised his hand to speak. We need to make sure the treasury is full, especially with the uncertain situation on the stepstones. That's right, I veto the prince's proposal, Jasper added. As the small council voiced their opposition, Viserys took a deep breath and said, This proposal is dismissed. The country can't afford such extravagance. The kingdom is always short of money, Rhaegar muttered, undeterred. The reconstruction can wait, but the reform program must pass. The reform program included increasing the number of dragon keepers, dragon combat training, and reorganizing a research group. Rhaenyra turned to Rhaegar in surprise. Despite her time as heir, she hadn't been allowed to present programs to the pre-regency council so freely. She suddenly realized the gap between them. Rhaegar was no longer a child but a grown man. His silver gold hair, dark circles under his eyes, high nose and firm lips gave him a dignified appearance. His posture was straight, his demeanor calm, and his manners impeccable. Many noble ladies in the kingdom had been enchanted by him at first sight. Suddenly, Rhaenyra's earlobes turned slightly red, and she hurriedly looked away. Rhaegar is an adult now, she murmured to herself, her heart beating a little faster. No one noticed the princess's thoughts as the discussion over the dragon pit reform continued heatedly. Half an hour later, the discussion concluded. Viserys clapped his hands and said, The dragon pit can be reformed, but it must be done within its limits. If anything goes wrong, it should be halted immediately. Yes, father. The motion passed, and Rhaegar, grateful, embraced his father. He had never expected the proposal to rebuild the dragon pit to pass. Reform had been his primary goal. The current dragon pit was still too weak and needed strengthening in every aspect. Viserys, somewhat resigned, squeezed his eldest son's arm. It gave him some comfort. The mere sight of a healthy, intelligent heir was reassuring. Viserys thought for a moment and then advised, you can take charge of the dragon pit, but after this, you will assist the advisors and learn how to run the kingdom. Rhaegar understood his father's good intentions and accepted gladly. No problem, father. With the dragon pit matter settled, the small council moved on to other political issues. Rhaenyra, not particularly interested in politics, rose silently from her chair. She walked around the council table, picked up a flask from the fireplace, and poured a glass of wine for her father. She then served each of the ministers. The ministers nodded their thanks, and for a moment, it felt like old times. Rhaenyra, as a young girl, had often served wine while listening to the council's discussions. When she finally reached Rhaegar, nostalgia filled her. She lifted the wine bottle skillfully. Rhaegar, however, covered his glass and moved aside. Looking at her gently, he said, "You're not serving wine anymore." After her teenage years, Rhaenyra had grown more beautiful, deserving the title Realm's Delight. Rhaenyra smiled. "I have to do something. Sit down. The meeting will be over soon." Rhaegar pulled her back into her seat and pushed the flask toward their father, who had finished his drink. Word count, 1097.
Thanks for listening.